What if the greatest stories from our past weren't just written in books or passed down through generations, but were actually locked inside objects, tangible, mysterious relics that have survived wars, empires, and the slow erosion of time? These artifacts aren't merely old, they're keepers of secrets, each one a silent witness to moments that shaped humanity. They carry with them questions that have haunted historians, archaeologists, and dreamers for centuries. Some were lost only to be rediscovered under astonishing circumstances. Others have been right in front of us all along, hiding their truths in plain sight. And every one of them holds a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of a larger, breathtaking narrative about who we are and where we've come from. Today, we're setting off on a journey to explore 35 of the most astonishing legendary artifacts the world has ever known. From ancient mystical devices whose purposes we still can't fully explain, to jewels rumored to be cursed, to manuscripts written in languages no one has ever been able to decode, each of these items tells a story far bigger than itself. They challenge what we think we know about history, science, and even reality. They've inspired quests, fueled legends, and ignited debates that continue to this day. And behind each artifact, there are human stories of those who made them, those who sought them, and those who are still trying to uncover what they truly mean. You're about to step into a world where mystery and history collide, where every object has a tale waiting to be told. A tale of wonder, danger, discovery, and sometimes magic. This isn't just a list, it's an invitation to explore, to question, and to feel the thrill of the unknown. So settle in, open your mind, and let's uncover the secrets behind some of history's most captivating treasures, one astonishing artifact at a time. Our journey begins not in a dusty tomb or a hidden temple, but at the bottom of the sea. In the year 1900, sponge divers off the coast of the tiny Greek island of Antikythera were forced to shelter from a storm. When the waters calmed, one of them dove down and returned with a terrifying story. He described a scene of horror, a heap of rotting corpses and horses strewn across the seabed. What he had actually discovered, as we now know, was the wreck of an ancient Roman cargo ship, its wooden hull long gone, leaving behind a ghostly tableau of marble and bronze statues. Among the incredible treasures recovered was a lump of corroded bronze and wood that seemed entirely unremarkable. It was set aside with other broken objects, seemingly just another piece of ancient junk. For nearly half a century, it sat in a museum storage room, its true nature completely missed. Then, in 1951, a British science historian named Derek J. de Sola Price took an interest in the strange, calcified lump. As he began to carefully clean and examine it, something astonishing was revealed: gears. Dozens of precisely cut, interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth smaller than a millimeter wide. It was a mechanical clockwork device, but it was found on a ship that sank around 80 BC, a time when no such technology was thought to exist. This was the Antikythera Mechanism, and it would completely upend our understanding of ancient Greek science. Researchers, using advanced imaging techniques like three-dimensional X-ray scanning, have since been able to peer inside the encrusted fragments and virtually reconstruct the device. They discovered it was an incredibly sophisticated astronomical calculator operated by a hand crank. Its complex arrangement of at least 30 intermeshing gears could predict the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets known to the Greeks. It could forecast lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and it even modeled the irregular orbit of the moon. A dial on the front could be used to track the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. This wasn't just a tool for science, it was an intricate orrery of the known cosmos, a physical representation of the heavens themselves. The sheer genius of its design is what truly baffles historians. The mechanism uses a differential gear, a complex component previously believed to have been invented in the 16th century. this level of precision engineering wouldn't be seen again for over 1,000 years. So who built this marvel, and why was such groundbreaking technology seemingly lost to history? The leading theory suggests it was the work of a brilliant school of astronomers and engineers, perhaps connected to the legendary inventor Archimedes in Syracuse. Its purpose was likely both practical and philosophical, used for navigation, creating calendars, and demonstrating the profound Greek belief in a universe governed by mathematical order. Its loss, perhaps on that ill-fated voyage from Rhodes to Rome, may have set scientific progress back by centuries, leaving us to wonder what other wonders from the ancient world still lie undiscovered, waiting to rewrite history once more. Moving from a machine that mapped the cosmos to a book that seems to defy understanding entirely, we encounter an artifact whose secrets are locked not in gears but in gibberish. Discovered in 1912 by a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Voynich, this enigmatic codex is perhaps the most infamous unreadable book in the world. Its 240 vellum pages are filled from edge to edge with a flowing, unknown script, a language that looks vaguely familiar yet remains completely indecipherable. The text is accompanied by a riot of strange and beautiful illustrations that only deepen the mystery. Drawings of plants that don't resemble any known species on Earth, intricate astrological charts featuring unfamiliar constellations, and perhaps most curiously, pages filled with dozens of small, naked women bathing in or connected by a network of green, tubular structures that look like kind of bizarre plumbing or biological system. For over a century, the world's top cryptographers, linguists, and mathematicians have tried to crack the Voynich Manuscript's code, and all have failed spectacularly. This includes teams from both world wars who successfully broke far more complex military ciphers. They turned their skills to the manuscript and were utterly stumped. The text possesses statistical patterns found in genuine language, suggesting it is not a random forgery. It has a distinct syntax with certain characters appearing only at the beginning or end of words, and the word lengths and repetition rates match those of real linguistic structures. Yet it defies every attempt to find meaning. Some theorists propose it was written in a sophisticated cipher designed to protect valuable alchemical or herbal knowledge. Others suggest it might be an attempt to record a now lost natural language, or even a constructed language created from scratch. Theories about its origins are as wild as its illustrations. The vellum has been carbon dated to the early 15th century, placing its creation in the Renaissance. Some believe it was the work of a clever con artist like the occultist Edward Kelly, who might have fabricated it to swindle a wealthy patron like Rudolph II of Bohemia, who was known for his fascination with the strange and mystical. The more fringe explanations venture into the territory of extraterrestrial contact, proposing the book is an alien message or a guide to otherworldly biology. A more grounded, yet still tragic, theory posits that it could be the work of someone suffering from a neurological condition, creating a sprawling, nonsensical text in a state of glossolalia or speaking in tongues. Despite the countless dead ends, the quest to understand the Voynich Manuscript continues to captivate new generations of codebreakers, now armed with artificial intelligence and powerful algorithms. In recent years, there have been claims of partial decipherment, suggesting it could be a manual on women's health written in a coded form of Old Turkish or a forgotten Romance language, but none of these solutions have gained widespread acceptance from the academic community. The manuscript's power lies in its perfect, pristine mystery. It is a locked door for which no key has yet been found, a beautiful, maddening puzzle that reminds us that even in our age of information, some secrets from the past remain fiercely guarded. While the Voynich Manuscript presents a linguistic enigma, our next artifact poses a technological one that seems to defy the very timeline of human innovation. In 1936, during excavations of a 2,000-year-old Parthian village near Baghdad, workers unearthed something that looked utterly mundane at first glance, a small 13-centimeter tall clay jar. But inside this unassuming vessel was a setup that would ignite a controversy that still rages today. The jar contained a copper cylinder housing an iron rod, and the whole assembly was sealed at the top with an asphalt plug. Traces of a corrosive acidic agent like vinegar or wine were found inside. To Wilhelm Koenig, the German archaeologist who studied it, the resemblance to a simple galvanic cell was unmistakable. He had, it appeared, discovered an ancient battery now famously known as the Baghdad Battery. The principle behind it is elementary yet brilliant. If the jar was filled with an acidic electrolyte solution, a chemical reaction would occur between the acidic liquid and the two different metals. The iron rod would act as an anode, losing electrons, while the copper cylinder would serve as the cathode, gaining them. This flow of electrons through the acidic medium would create a small electrical current, potentially generating around 1 volt of electricity, not enough to power a device, but enough for a subtle, tangible effect. The big question, of course, is whether this was its intended purpose. Did the Parthians, or perhaps the later Sasanians to whom some of the jars are also attributed, actually understand and harness electrochemical energy over 2 millennia before Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery in 1800? One of the most compelling theories for its use is electroplating, the process of using an electric current to coat a common metal with a thin layer of a more precious one, like gold or silver. Artisans of the time were master gilders, and many ancient objects show evidence of a technique where gold leaf was applied using a mercury-based adhesive. However, some artifacts have a plating so thin and uniform that some researchers argue it would have been incredibly difficult to achieve without an electrochemical process. The small voltage from a Baghdad battery, especially if several were linked together in a series to create a higher voltage, could have provided just enough current to facilitate this kind of precise work. It's a tantalizing idea that ancient craftsmen could have been using a form of electroplating to create the stunning jewelry and religious icons we admire in museums today. Yet not everyone is convinced by this electrifying hypothesis. Skeptics offer a much more ordinary explanation. The jars were simply secure storage containers for sacred scrolls. The iron rod and copper cylinder, in this view, were merely the core of a scroll made from organic materials like parchment or papyrus that had long since decayed, leaving only the metal components behind. The asphalt seal would have been an effective way to keep out moisture and protect the important texts inside. This is a perfectly logical and plausible explanation, and it highlights the fundamental challenge of archaeology, interpreting objects based on incomplete evidence. We only have the durable parts, the clay, copper, iron, and asphalt. The perishable elements which could have definitively proven one theory over the other are gone forever. The debate is further complicated by the fact that no wires or conductors have ever been found with the batteries, nor have any electroplated objects been definitively linked to them. If they were indeed batteries, their use might have been more mystical than practical. Some researchers suggest they could have been used for religious or medicinal purposes. The mild electric shock from holding a connected battery might have been interpreted as a divine sensation, a trick employed by priests to inspire awe in worshippers during ceremonies. Alternatively, they could have been used in early forms of acupuncture or pain therapy, a concept that, while speculative, finds echoes in the use of electric fish for numbing pain in other ancient cultures. Whether the Baghdad battery was a revolutionary technological device or a cleverly designed storage jar remains one of history's most captivating unsolved puzzles. It forces us to confront our assumptions about the linear progression of knowledge. We tend to think of invention as a steady march forward, but history is full of dead ends and forgotten discoveries. The Antikythera Mechanism shows us that the ancients possessed mechanical genius we didn't credit them for. the Baghdad Battery asks us to consider if they also understood a fundamental force of nature that would not be rediscovered for centuries. Its true purpose may never be known for certain, but its very existence challenges us to keep an open mind about the capabilities of our ancestors, reminding us that the past might hold sparks of genius we have only just begun to recognize. From the debate over ancient electricity, we turn now to an artifact that ignites an even more profound debate, one that sits at the crossroads of faith, science, and history. It is a simple piece of linen measuring approximately 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide, and it bears the faint, haunting image of a man who appears to have suffered the torturous wounds of crucifixion. This is the Shroud of Turin, and for millions of believers, it is not merely an archaeological curiosity. It is the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ, imprinted with his likeness in the moments of his resurrection. For skeptics, it is a masterful medieval forgery, a clever hoax that has somehow endured for centuries. The truth, as with so many of these artifacts, is shrouded in mystery and fiercely contested. The image on the cloth is a photographic negative. This astonishing fact wasn't discovered until 1898, when an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was allowed to take the first official photographs of the shroud. As he developed the glass plates in his darkroom, he was stunned to see a positive, highly detailed image of a man emerge in the negatives. The shroud itself is the negative. The ghostly, sepia-toned imprint on the cloth reverses into a startlingly clear and three-dimensional portrait of a bearded man with long hair, bearing the precise wounds described in the biblical accounts of the crucifixion. There are wounds on the wrists and feet consistent with being nailed to a cross, scourge marks across the back from a Roman flagrum, a puncture wound in the side, and even lacerations around the forehead that could correspond to a crown of thorns. The level of anatomical and pathological detail is so accurate that many medical professionals have studied it, agreeing that it depicts a real human trauma. For much of its known history, the shroud was in the possession of the House of Savoy, the royal family of Italy, who kept it in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. Its documented history stretches back to the 1350s in France, which is where the problems for its authenticity begin. In 1389, the local Bishop of Troyes even declared it a fraud, stating an artist had confessed to creating it. This historical record seemed to settle the matter for many until 20th century science began to ask new questions. The most significant blow to the shroud's authenticity came in 1988. With the permission of the Vatican, small samples from a corner of the linen cloth were sent to 3 independent laboratories at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Using radiocarbon dating, a highly reliable method for determining the age of organic materials, all 3 labs reached the same astonishing conclusion. The samples dated from between 1260 and 1390. This placed the shroud's origin firmly in the Middle Ages, seemingly confirming the bishop's claim from 600 years prior and branding it as an elaborate medieval forgery. Yet the story did not end there. Almost immediately, critics of the carbon dating results raised serious objections. They pointed out that the sample taken came from a corner of the shroud that was handled frequently and had been damaged by a fire in 1532. This fire, which nearly destroyed the relic, left it scorched and drenched with water, potentially introducing carbon contaminants that would skew the dating results significantly. Some researchers have proposed that microbial contamination or even an invisible bacterial biopolymer coating on the threads could have made the sample appear centuries younger than it actually is. These claims remain hotly disputed, and the carbon dating results, while authoritative, are not considered the final word by a large contingent of shroud researchers. The greatest enigma and the heart of the mystery is the image itself. How was it formed? Modern science has been utterly unable to replicate it. The coloration is not caused by any pigment, paint, or dye. It exists only on the very topmost microfibers of the linen threads, a phenomenon that would be impossible to achieve with any known artistic technique from the medieval period or any other. It is not a scorch, and it possesses a three-dimensional information depth that a simple contact imprint could not produce. Some scientists have theorized that a short, intense burst of directed radiation, perhaps from some kind of event occurring within the body itself, could have caused a superficial dehydration and oxidation of the cellulose fibers, projecting the image onto the cloth. This, of course, ventures into the realm of the unexplainable and feeds directly into the resurrection narrative. The debate over the Shroud of Turin is perhaps the ultimate clash between empirical evidence and belief. Science points to a medieval origin, yet cannot explain the mechanism of the image's creation. Faith points to a divine miracle, yet must contend with the carbon dating results. It exists in that fascinating space where every answer seems to generate two new questions, a relic that challenges not only our historical understanding, but also the very limits of what we know about physics and chemistry. Whether it is the authentic burial cloth of Christ or the most ingenious and inexplicable forgery in human history, its power endures, captivating the faithful and the skeptical alike with its silent, mysterious testimony. From an object of veneration to relics that captivated the world with a blend of archaeology and outright fantasy, we arrive at the enigmatic crystal skulls. These hauntingly beautiful carvings, made from clear or milky quartz and often life-sized, captured the public imagination with a compelling story. They were said to be ancient Mesoamerican artifacts, specifically from Aztec or Mayan cultures, crafted with a perfection that defied the technology of their time. Legends swirled around them, suggesting they held psychic powers, could reveal the future, or were part of a collection of 13 skulls that, when reunited, would unlock profound ancient wisdom and save humanity. They became icons of the New Age movement and starred in blockbuster films, solidifying their place in modern mythology. But the truth behind their origins is a fascinating tale of deception, wishful thinking, and the enduring power of a good story. The most famous of these skulls is the Mitchell Hedges skull, named after the British adventurer F.A. Mitchell Hedges, who claimed his daughter, Anna, discovered it beneath a collapsed altar in a temple in British Honduras, now Belize, in 1924. Its appearance is stunningly lifelike, with a separate mandible that moves perfectly on hinges, and it is carved from a single, flawless block of clear quartz. For decades, it was presented as a genuine Maya artifact, a masterpiece of unknown technology. Other skulls, like the one displayed for years at the Smithsonian Institution and the British Museum, also entered collections with similar mysterious backstories, often attributed to anonymous donors or vague 19th century origins. The romantic narrative began to unravel in the 1990s and 2000s, when these institutions, tired of the persistent questions, decided to subject their skulls to rigorous scientific analysis. Researchers used scanning electron microscopes to examine the surfaces of the skulls under high magnification. What they found was definitive. The carving marks on the British Museum and Smithsonian skulls showed clear evidence of being made with rotary wheels and polishing compounds like jewelers' rouge technologies that were simply not available to pre-Columbian Mesoamerican artisans. These tools were hallmarks of 19th century European lapidary workshops, not ancient hand-powered tools using sand and water for abrasion. The evidence was incontrovertible. These were modern fakes. Further investigation into the Mitchell Hedges skull revealed a similar, though more complex, story. Despite the thrilling tale of its jungle discovery, there is no evidence that Mitchell Hedges was even in Belize in 1924, and no contemporary records or photographs of the find exist. Research points to the skull likely being purchased by Mitchell Hedges at a Sotheby's auction in London in 1943. Its unparalleled craftsmanship, once cited as proof of its ancient and possibly alien origins, is now seen by experts as the very evidence of its modern creation. The precision of its carving, especially the perfectly moving jawbone, is a testament to the incredible skill of 19th century European gem cutters, particularly those in Germany, who are known for creating such curiosities for the thriving market in antiquities. So why were they made? The answer lies in the 19th century fascination with the exotic and the ancient. The era was ripe for such forgeries. There was a huge demand from museums and private collectors for pre-Columbian artifacts, fueling a market where provenance was often overlooked in favor of a good tale. Skilled artisans, particularly in Europe, were more than happy to supply this demand, creating ancient relics that catered to the romanticized notions of lost civilizations and their hidden powers. The crystal skulls were perfect for this. They were visually spectacular, spiritually evocative, and just mysterious enough to be believable. Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence that the major museum skulls are 19th century fabrications, their mystical allure has not entirely faded. For many in the metaphysical and New Age communities, the scientific debunking is irrelevant. They believe the skull's power is not dependent on their age or origin, but on their form and the energy they are believed to channel or amplify. They are used as focal points for meditation, healing, and psychic work, seen as tools rather than historical artifacts. The legend of the 13 skulls waiting to be reunited persists, a testament to humanity's deep desire for connection, meaning, and the hope that somewhere out there, a lost wisdom holds the key to our future. The crystal skulls, therefore, stand as a powerful lesson in the difference between archaeological fact and cultural belief, reminding us that an object's true power often lies not in where it came from, but in what we choose to believe about it. Leaving behind the crafted mysteries of crystal and cloth, we now turn our gaze upward to a vast canvas where the very Earth itself has been shaped into one of the planet's most breathtaking and perplexing puzzles. High on the arid plateaus of southern Peru, scorched by a relentless sun, lies a series of enigmas so massive they can only be truly comprehended from the air. These are the Nazca Lines, a sprawling collection of hundreds of geometric shapes and immense animal figures etched into the desert floor over 2,000 years ago. Created by the Nazca people who flourished between 200 BC and 600 AD, these geoglyphs range from simple straight lines running for miles to incredibly complex and precise depictions of a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey with an elaborately coiled tail, and even a strange humanoid figure nicknamed the astronaut. The scale is almost unimaginable. Some figures are over 1,200 feet long, their outlines formed by the simple act of removing the dark, sun-baked pebbles from the surface to reveal the lighter-colored sand beneath. It is a work of art on a monumental scale, a gallery without walls where the entire desert is the exhibit. The central question that has captivated explorers, archaeologists, and UFO enthusiasts for decades is a simple one. Why? Why would a culture invest such staggering effort into creating colossal images they could never hope to see in their entirety? The most enduring and scientifically supported theory is that the lines served a profound astronomical and calendrical purpose. Researchers like Maria Reich, a German mathematician who dedicated her life to studying the lines, proposed that many of the geoglyphs functioned as a giant celestial calendar, aligning with the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and significant stars during solstices and equinoxes. These alignments would have been crucial for the Nazca, an agricultural society utterly dependent on knowing when the seasonal rains would arrive to nourish their crops in the parched landscape. The lines could have provided a precise, unchangeable map of the heavens, used by priests to dictate the timing of planting, harvests, and important religious ceremonies, turning the desert into a sacred observatory that connected their earthly struggles directly to the cycles of the cosmos. A related theory suggests the geoglyphs were pathways for ritual processions. In this view, the Nazca people did not need to see the full figures. The act of walking the lines itself was the point. Certain shapes, particularly the trapezoids and rectangles, are often found linked to small mounds and ancient ceramic shards, hinting at their use as ceremonial plazas. Participants might have walked these paths during water-related rituals, a constant and vital concern in one of the driest places on Earth, praying to deities represented by the animal figures for life-giving rain. The spider, for instance, is a symbol of rain in many Andean cultures, while the hummingbird is associated with the mountain gods who are believed to control the weather. By tracing these figures, the people could have been symbolically interacting with the powerful forces of nature, their footsteps a form of prayer etched permanently into the land. Of course, no discussion of the Nazca Lines is complete without addressing the most famous and controversial hypothesis, that they were landing strips or navigation beacons for extraterrestrial spacecraft. This idea, popularized in the 1960s, hinges on the premise that such precise and large-scale designs could not have been created by a primitive culture without some form of advanced technology or aerial guidance. Proponents point to the seemingly runway-like appearance of some of the long, straight lines and trapezoids. While a captivating notion for science fiction, this theory is overwhelmingly dismissed by archaeologists. We know the Nazca possessed the simple technology and organizational skills to create the lines. Using wooden stakes and ropes, they could have plotted out the designs from smaller scale models, scaling them up with remarkable accuracy. The straight lines are easily explained by the use of simple sighting posts, a low-tech method that is still demonstrably effective today. The ancient astronauts' idea, while fun to contemplate, ultimately robs the Nazca people of their own ingenuity and reduces their incredible cultural achievement to a passive act for outside visitors. Perhaps just as mysterious as their purpose is their incredible preservation. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, receiving less than an inch of rain per year. This extreme aridity is the primary reason the lines have survived for millennia. The pebbles that were removed to create the designs are coated in a dark desert varnish, a thin layer of manganese and iron oxides that formed over thousands of years of exposure. When these stones are removed, the lighter, unvarnished sand beneath is exposed. Furthermore, the subsurface in this region has a high gypsum content. The morning mist and rare dew react with it, fusing the tiny sand particles together and creating a hardened crust that is highly resistant to erosion. The very climate that makes the region so inhospitable has acted as a perfect natural museum curator, protecting these fragile designs from the wind and the rare rain that would otherwise have washed them away centuries ago. The Nazca Lines stand as a powerful testament to human creativity, spiritual yearning, and a deep desire to leave a mark on the world that would outlast generations. They are a message from the past, written on a scale so grand its full meaning is still, quite literally, up in the air. Hidden away in the ruins of the Minoan palace of Phaistos on the sun-drenched island of Crete lies a mystery baked in clay. It was the summer of 1908 when Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernia made the discovery. Amid the rubble of a basement storeroom, he unearthed a small, fired clay disc, roughly 6 inches in diameter. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, another piece of pottery in a civilization renowned for its ceramics. But when he brushed off the dust, he revealed something that would baffle scholars for over a century. Both sides of the disc were covered, from edge to center, in a spiral of meticulously stamped symbols, hieroglyphic impressions of men and women, ships and shields, birds and bees, flowers and fish. This was the Phaistos disc, and it remains one of the most intensely studied and completely undeciphered objects ever found. What makes the disc so utterly unique and so maddening is its singular nature. It is the only known example of its kind. The 241 symbols, made up of 45 distinct signs, were not carved or painted. They were pressed into the soft clay with individual seals or punches, making it one of the oldest examples of movable type printing in the world, predating Gutenberg's press by over 3,000 years. But if this technology existed, why do we not find other examples who created this single, precise set of stamps, used them to create this one object, and then they vanished from the archaeological record without a trace? This isolation is the core of the enigma. Without other examples of the script, which has been dubbed Linear A, but is actually its own unique system, there is nothing to compare it to. Decipherment usually relies on finding a Rosetta Stone, a parallel text in a known language. For the Phaistos disc, there is no parallel. It is a message from a silent world, speaking a language we cannot hear. This has not stopped a torrent of theories about its meaning. The spiral direction, moving from the outer edge inward toward the center on both sides, suggests a purposeful order, a text meant to be read. But what does it say? One prominent idea is that it is a religious hymn or a prayer. Many of the symbols seem ideographic, potentially representing concepts. A figure that appears to be a helmeted head, for instance, could mean warrior, while a depiction of a beehive might symbolize honey or sweetness. The repetitive pattern of certain groups of signs, separated by a distinct slash mark, hints at a rhythmic, poetic structure, perhaps an invocation to a Minoan deity. Another compelling theory posits that it is a legal document or a treaty. The presence of signs resembling architectural features like buildings and towers could indicate property or boundaries, while the human figures might denote signatories or clans. Not all theories are so serious. Some suggest it could be the board for an ancient, complex game, a prehistoric ancestor to something like backgammon, with a spiral path representing the movement of pieces. The symbols would then not be a language at all, but instructional icons for gameplay. Others, noting its discovery in a basement near a temple complex, think it might be a sacred object used for divination, a tool for priests to predict the future. There are even more fringe suggestions, including that it is a geometric puzzle, an early form of musical notation, or a gift from a foreign ambassador that somehow never got duplicated. The possibility of forgery has also been raised, though most scholars dismiss it. The circumstantial evidence for its authenticity is strong. It was found during a well-documented official excavation led by a respected archaeologist. The clay is local to Crete, and its age is consistent with the Middle Minoan period, around 1700 BC. A modern forger in 1908 would have had to possess an incredibly sophisticated understanding of Minoan symbology that simply did not exist at the time, and then choose to create a one-of-a-kind object with a revolutionary printing technique for no apparent financial gain. The odds of it being a hoax are considered very low, which only deepens the genuine mystery. Modern technology has been brought to bear on the disc with limited success. High-resolution scans have been analyzed to confirm the order of the stamp impressions and rule out the possibility of modern tool marks. Computer algorithms and statistical analysis have been used to study the frequency and grouping of the symbols, confirming that it does behave like a true written language, with signs that likely represent both syllables and whole words. Yet, without a linguistic relatives to connect it to, even the most powerful computers hit a dead end. The language encoded in those symbols could be an early form of Greek, an Anatolian language like Luwian, or something else entirely that was lost when the Minoan civilization was eclipsed. The Phaistos disc stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of knowledge. It is a single, perfect snapshot of a complex thought, a message that was clearly important enough for someone to go through extraordinary effort to preserve. We can see the message perfectly clearly, but the meaning is locked away, a secret the past has chosen to keep. While the Phaistos disc presents a linguistic puzzle with no solution in sight, another ancient discovery offers tantalizing instructions to a treasure that may be just as elusive. In the year 1952, archaeologists made a remarkable find in a cave near the ruins of Qumran, the same site where the now famous Dead Sea Scrolls had been discovered. But this scroll was different. While the others were made of fragile parchment or papyrus, this one was crafted from metal, a hybrid of 99% copper and 1% tin. It was so heavily corroded and brittle that scholars dared not unroll it for fear of turning it to dust. For 5 years, it sat as an unreadable mystery until a professor at the University of Manchester made a daring decision. He carefully sawed the scroll into 23 separate strips, finally revealing the text stamped into the metal inside. This was the copper scroll, and it wasn't a religious text or a historical account. It was a treasure map. The contents were startling. Written in a form of Hebrew different from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, it contains a precise matter-of-fact list. It describes 64 different caches of treasure, meticulously detailing vast quantities of gold, silver, precious vessels, aromatics, and even other scrolls. The sums are astronomical, listing over 4,600 talents of gold and silver. To put that in perspective, a single talent was roughly 75 pounds, meaning the scroll describes a total haul weighing hundreds of tons and worth billions in today's currency. This was not a vague legend, it was an inventory, and it provided very specific, albeit cryptic, directions to each hiding place. The instructions read like a maddening riddle, a series of clues that are precise yet frustratingly anchored to landmarks that have been lost to time. It directs seekers to locations like the ruin that is in the valley, the gutter of the water outlet, or the tomb that has 2 pillars. It mentions specific numbers of steps, references pools and dams, and even names a place called Kolet. For generations of treasure hunters, these clues have been an irresistible siren's call. Expeditions have scoured the Judean desert around Qumran, armed with the scroll's text and the latest technology, from ground-penetrating radar to metal detectors. They have dug near aqueducts, explored ancient tombs, and scanned every valley and hill mentioned in historical texts. Yet, without exception, every single search has come up empty. Not 1 ounce of the copper scroll's legendary treasure has ever been found. This complete lack of success has led many scholars to a compelling alternative theory. Perhaps the treasure was never meant to be found because it was never physically real. Could the copper scroll be a work of fiction, or more intriguingly, a symbolic religious document? Some experts point out that the language and style are unique among the Dead Sea Scrolls, more akin to a financial record than a sacred text. They suggest it might be a record of the vast wealth of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, catalogued and hidden for safekeeping before the Roman siege in 70 AD. The Essenes, the ascetic Jewish sect believed to have authored the Dead Sea Scrolls, may have been entrusted with this list to protect the treasury from the invading armies. In this view, the treasure is very real, but so brilliantly hidden or so thoroughly looted by the Romans that it is now lost forever. The symbolic interpretation, however, is even more fascinating. The numbers and descriptions could be allegorical, representing spiritual concepts rather than material wealth. The precise measurements of gold and silver might correspond to aspects of Jewish mysticism or liturgical practice. The act of hiding the treasure could be a metaphor for safeguarding sacred knowledge or religious tradition during a time of immense persecution. The treasure, then, wouldn't be gold bars in a cave, but the preservation of faith itself, with the scroll serving as a symbolic testament to its enduring value. This reading transforms the copper scroll from a map to a metaphysical poem, its true value lying not in what it can lead you to dig up, but in what it makes you contemplate. The mystery endures because both interpretations are equally plausible and equally unproven. The pragmatic, literal directions suggest a real, physical treasure, while its isolation from the other scrolls and the implausible size of the hoard suggest something more conceptual. The copper scroll remains a unique outlier, a metallic enigma among the leather and papyrus of its counterparts. It challenges us to decide what we are looking at. Is it the greatest treasure map in history, waiting for the right person to finally decode its ancient landmarks? Or is it a profound spiritual allegory, reminding us that the most valuable treasures are not those we bury in the ground, but those we hold in our beliefs? Until a single piece of its described bounty is unearthed, the copper scroll will continue to guard its secret, offering the thrill of the hunt and the wisdom of parable in equal measure. On the coast of Maine, nestled within the tangled roots of a spruce tree, a single coin sparked a controversy that would challenge the very timeline of American history. The year was 1957, and amateur archaeologists were excavating the remains of a 13th century Penobscot Native American settlement at a site known as Goddard. Among the typical finds of stone tools and pottery shards, something entirely unexpected came to light: a small silver coin. It was sent to the Maine State Museum, where it was initially misidentified as a British token from the 1200s. But a decade later, an expert took a closer look and realized the startling truth. This was no English coin. It was a Norse penny, a Norwegian coin minted during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre between 1067 and 1093. The implications were staggering. This tiny piece of silver, found in a prehistoric Native American site, suggested that Vikings had not only reached Canada's Newfoundland, as proven at Elance Aux Meadows, but had traveled hundreds of miles further south into what is now the United States, a full 4 centuries before Christopher Columbus set sail. The initial reaction was one of immense excitement. Here, it seemed, was the first and only pre-Columbian Norse artifact ever found within the United States. The discovery appeared to be the smoking gun that could connect the dots between the known Viking settlement in Newfoundland and the sagas that spoke of a land of wild grapes called Vinland, which many historians believe could have been located further south along the North Atlantic coast. The theory gained even more traction when the dates were considered. The Norse penny was minted in the late 11th century, and the Goddard site was radiocarbon dated to the 1200s. This timeline was perfectly plausible. A coin minted in Norway could have been brought over by a Norse explorer, perhaps even one from the Elance Aux Meadows settlement, and eventually found its way into the hands of the native people in Maine through trade or as a lost item. However, the initial wave of excitement soon met with a tide of healthy scientific skepticism. The primary issue is the coin's complete isolation. At Elance Aux Meadows, archaeologists found an entire settlement, the foundations of Norse longhouses, a forge for smithing iron, and a variety of everyday objects that left no doubt about a Viking presence. At the Goddard site, there is only the coin. No other Norse artifacts were ever found there: no tools, no nails, no pieces of clothing, nothing. A single coin, which could easily be moved from place to place, is not enough evidence to prove a physical Viking presence. It is an outlier, a solitary data point in an otherwise empty field. If Vikings had traveled to Maine, traded with the natives, or even established a temporary camp, we would expect to find more than just one small, easily lost silver penny. The absence of any corroborating evidence is a significant hurdle for the theory of direct contact. This lack of supporting evidence led many archaeologists to propose a far more likely explanation. The coin arrived not on a Viking longship, but through an extensive and sophisticated indigenous trade network that stretched across North America. We know these networks existed and moved goods over astonishing distances. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico have been found in the Great Lakes, and obsidian from Wyoming has been discovered in Ohio burial mounds. The Norse penny, once it entered the continent, perhaps at Elance Aux Meadows or another northern point of contact, could have been traded from hand to hand, moving slowly south over generations as a curious and valuable object. To a Native American trader, the coin wouldn't have been currency. It would have been a rare piece of exotic material, a shiny silver trinket to be prized, perhaps perforated and worn as a pendant. Its journey from a Norse explorer to a Wabanaki toolkit in Maine might have taken 100 years or more, traveling hundreds of miles through a chain of indigenous traders who had no concept of its origin, seeing it only as a novel item of beauty. There is also, unfortunately, the persistent shadow of a hoax. The Goddard site was not a professionally run excavation. It was dug by a group of dedicated amateurs. While there is no evidence to suggest they planted the coin, the circumstances of its discovery leave a tiny opening for doubt. It was found not in a carefully documented, sealed layer of earth, but in a disturbed area near the surface close to the roots of a tree. This makes it slightly more plausible, though still not likely, that the coin could have been a later contamination, dropped by a colonial settler or even a modern visitor. The reputable archaeologists who have studied the coin largely dismiss this idea, but it remains a talking point for those who are most skeptical of its significance. The Maine State Museum, which houses the coin, has officially categorized it as probably genuine, but representing trade, not a Norse visit, a careful and nuanced position that reflects the ongoing debate. So where does this leave the Maine Penny? It is an authentic Norse artifact found in a pre-Columbian context, but its story is probably not the simple one we might wish for. It is unlikely to be proof of Vikings walking the forests of Maine. Instead, its true story is arguably even more fascinating. It is a testament to the incredible reach and complexity of Native American trade routes, which acted as a continental internet, moving objects and ideas across thousands of miles. The coin is a tiny silver thread connecting two worlds, but that connection was almost certainly indirect. It symbolizes not a dramatic meeting of cultures, but a slow, patient, and vast exchange network that was already ancient when the first Europeans arrived. The Maine Penny doesn't rewrite history to include Vikings in New England, but it does powerfully rewrite our understanding of the dynamic, interconnected world that was already here waiting. It reminds us that an object's journey can be just as compelling as its origin, a single piece of silver that sailed across an ocean and then traveled across a continent, a silent witness to the countless hands that carried it from one world to another. If the Maine Penny offers a subtle thread connecting worlds through trade, the next artifact presents a paradox so stark it seems to defy the very foundations of geology. In the summer of 1936, a couple walking along a creek near the small town of London, Texas, noticed a curious piece of rock with a chunk of wood protruding from it. They took it home, and years later, their son broke open the nodule to reveal something that should not have been there: a perfectly formed hammer with a wooden handle, entirely encased in the ancient hardened stone. This is the London hammer, and it has become a classic icon of the out-of-place artifact phenomenon, an object that appears to challenge our established timelines of human history and technological development. The hammer itself is unremarkable in design, a tool that looks like it could have come from a 19th century blacksmith shop. The head is made of iron, and chemical analysis has shown it to be of a very pure quality, with a surprisingly low sulfur content, a characteristic of well-made historical ironwork. The wooden handle is partially petrified, having turned to coal over time, a process that requires significant age. The true mystery, however, lies in the rock that entombed it. The concretion, a type of hard mineral shell that forms around an object, was identified as being from the Cretaceous period, dating it to approximately 100 to 140 million years ago. For those who take this dating at face value, the implication is staggering. A modern-appearing hammer was somehow present on Earth millions of years before humans, or even our earliest hominid ancestors, had evolved. This apparent impossibility has fueled a wide range of speculative theories. The most popular and sensational explanation is that the hammer is evidence of time travel, that a tool from a more recent era was somehow transported back into the distant past and left there, eventually becoming fossilized. Others propose it is a relic from an advanced prehistoric human civilization like Atlantis or Lemuria that achieved a level of technology before being wiped out, leaving only scattered artifacts behind. These ideas capture the imagination because they speak to a deep-seated desire to find evidence that our understanding of history is incomplete. that there are lost chapters filled with advanced knowledge or incredible technologies. Mainstream science, however, offers a far more mundane yet geologically fascinating explanation. The key to the mystery lies not with the hammer, but with the process of concretion formation. Concretions are not layers of sedimentary rock that date to a specific period. They are hard, compact masses of mineral matter that can form much more recently around any object that serves as a nucleus. They form when mineral-rich groundwater percolates through sediments, depositing minerals like calcite, iron carbonate, or silica in concentric layers around an object. This process can happen relatively quickly, especially in the right chemical conditions, and does not require millions of years. The Cretaceous dating, therefore, applies to the ancient seabed sediments in which the concretion formed, not to the concretion itself. The hammer could have been lost a few hundred years ago, and the unique local conditions caused a hard shell of rock to form around it in a geologically short period. Further analysis supports this view. The hammer was found not in a solid bedrock outcrop from the Cretaceous period, but in a loose creek bed where erosion had likely washed it out. This context is crucial. It was not found in situ within a verified 100-million-year-old rock layer. It was a loose nodule, and its association with the ancient bedrock is circumstantial. The low sulfur content of the iron, while indicative of good smithing, is entirely consistent with 19th-century metallurgy. The most logical conclusion is that the hammer is exactly what it appears to be, a miner's or settler's tool from the 1800s that was lost or discarded. Over the decades, the mineral-rich waters of the creek facilitated the rapid formation of a concretion around it, creating a convincing but entirely natural illusion of immense antiquity. The enduring power of the London hammer story lies in this dramatic clash between appearance and scientific process. It is a perfect example of how our perceptions can be fooled by natural phenomena that operate on timescales we find difficult to comprehend. We see a hammer in solid rock and immediately assume both must be the same age. Geology teaches us that the relationship is far more complex. The rock isn't a time capsule from the Cretaceous. It's a much younger shell that grew around a modern object using minerals from an ancient environment. The London hammer doesn't challenge our timeline of history. Instead, it challenges us to look deeper and understand the intricate and often counterintuitive processes that shape our world. It serves as a reminder that the true wonder isn't always a lost civilization, but the incredible natural forces that can make a simple tool look like a miracle. Leaving behind the geological puzzle of the London hammer, we venture into a story that is perhaps the most famous and widely debunked legend of ancient astronauts, a tale that perfectly captures the UFO fever of the mid-20th century. Our next artifact isn't just one object, but a collection of hundreds, the enigmatic Dropa stones. The story begins in 1938, according to the account, when a Chinese archaeologist named Kai Pu-te is said to have been leading an expedition into the remote and rugged Bayan Ha Mountains on the border between China and Tibet. There, they allegedly discovered a series of caves that showed clear signs of artificial construction. The walls were smoothed and carved and arranged in a system that resembled tombs. Inside, they found the skeletons of a strange, diminutive people. These beings were reportedly only around 4 feet tall, with unusually large, elongated skulls. But the most bizarre discovery was scattered across the cave floor. Hundreds of stone discs, roughly 9 inches in diameter, each with a perfect hole in its center, resembling ancient stone records or gramophone plates. The discs, later dubbed the Dropa stones, were said to be incredibly ancient, carbon dated to around 12,000 years old, but their true mystery was etched into their surfaces. Each stone was allegedly inscribed with a fine, spiraling groove that, upon closer inspection, was actually a continuous line of tiny, microscopic hieroglyphic writing. The script was so small and precise that it was supposedly impossible to read with the naked eye. The story goes that decades later, in 1962, a professor named Tsum Nui at the Beijing Academy of Ancient Studies finally succeeded in deciphering the minuscule text. The translation he produced was nothing short of astounding. The discs told a heartbreaking story of a spacecraft that crashed in the mountains long ago. The occupants, who called themselves the Dropa, were the small-statured beings found in the cave. Unable to repair their ship and stranded on an alien world, they were hunted and killed by the local tribespeople who feared them. The inscriptions were their poignant plea for help, a permanent record of their doomed struggle for survival on Earth. This incredible narrative, with its perfect blend of ancient mystery and sci-fi wonder, spread like wildfire through UFO literature and popular magazines in the 1960s and 70s. It had all the elements of a compelling saga, a daring archaeological discovery, strange bodies, and undeniable proof of extraterrestrial contact millennia before the modern era. The problem, however, is that there is no tangible evidence any of it ever actually happened. Let's scrutinize the claims. The central figures in the story are complete phantoms. There are no credible records of an archaeologist named Kai Pu-te or a professor Tsum Nui ever working at the Beijing Academy. Their names do not appear in any official academic registers or archaeological reports from China. No photographs of the expedition, the skeletons, or the caves have ever been produced. Most damningly, not a single one of the 716 Dropa stones has ever been displayed in a museum or subjected to independent scientific analysis. Every piece of the story is hearsay, recounted in sensational books and articles, but never verified by a reputable academic or scientific institution. The entire tale appears to be a classic example of a modern myth, cobbled together from various sources and amplified by the cultural zeitgeist of its time. The 1960s were the absolute peak of fascination with flying saucers, ancient astronauts, and the idea that human history was influenced by extraterrestrial visitors. Books like Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods were becoming international bestsellers, promoting the idea that ancient monuments and artifacts were too sophisticated to be human creations. The Dropa stone story fit this template perfectly, providing a seemingly archaeological basis for these wild claims. It's far more likely that the story was invented whole cloth by a UFO enthusiast or sensational writer, perhaps inspired by real but mundane archaeological finds. China does have a rich history of ancient jade discs known as bai, which have a similar circular shape with a central hole. These were ritual objects often placed in burials, and they carry no mysterious inscriptions. It's possible that a real discovery of such discs was conflated and embellished with a science fiction narrative to create the Dropa legend. The story's power and persistence are a fascinating study in themselves. Despite being thoroughly debunked by mainstream archaeology and history, the legend of the Dropa stones refuses to die. It continues to be shared and believed by a dedicated community online and in books about ancient mysteries. This endurance speaks to a deep and enduring human desire for connection with the cosmos, for proof that we are not alone and that our past is more extraordinary than our textbooks allow. The Dropa stones were never physical artifacts, they were cultural artifacts, a perfect reflection of the hopes, fears, and imaginations of the mid-20th century. They represent not a lost chapter of history, but a captivating chapter in the history of our own fascination with the unknown. A reminder that the most compelling stories are sometimes those we create to make the universe feel a little more wondrous and a little less empty. Found among the treasures in an 1898 excavation of the Padimen tomb in Saqqara, Egypt, was a small, carefully carved object made of sycamore wood. Dating back to approximately 200 BC, it was catalogued simply as object number 6347 and stored away in the Cairo Museum's basement. For decades, it was dismissed as a figurine of a bird, likely a toy or a simple ceremonial offering. It wasn't until the 1970s that a visitor to the museum, Dr. Khalil Messiha, an Egyptologist with a passion for model aircraft, took a closer look and saw something everyone else had missed. This was no ordinary bird. Its wings were straight, sharp, and perfectly leveled, unlike the angled, flapping wings of a bird in flight. It lacked the legs and feet that would typically be carved on an avian figure. Most strikingly, it had a distinct vertical tail fin that looked nothing like the fan tail of a bird, but everything like the stabilizer on a modern airplane. This was the Saqqara bird, and its discovery would send a ripple of excitement through the worlds of archaeology and aeronautics, sparking a debate that continues to this day. The central question is as simple as it is profound. What was its purpose? The mainstream and most widely accepted explanation is that it was a ceremonial object, a votive offering meant to be placed in a tomb. In this view, it represents a falcon, the sacred bird of the god Horus. The straight wings could symbolize the bird soaring in the heavens, a representation of the soul's journey into the afterlife. The missing legs could be explained by the fact that it was meant to be mounted on a pedestal, or perhaps even attached to the head of a staff as a standard during religious processions. This interpretation fits perfectly within the well-documented artistic and religious traditions of ancient Egypt, where stylized animal figures were commonplace and laden with symbolic meaning. It was, in essence, a beautiful and sacred piece of folk art, a child's toy only in the sense that it might have been a divine plaything. The more controversial and thrilling theory, however, proposes that the Saqqara bird is evidence of precocious aerodynamic experimentation. Proponents of this idea, like Dr. Messiha, point to its precise aerodynamic profile. The cross-section of its wings is not flat. It is shaped like an airfoil with a slightly curved upper surface and a flatter lower surface. This is the same basic design that creates lift on an airplane wing, as air moving faster over the curved top creates a region of lower pressure. The vertical tail fin is the most compelling piece of evidence for this theory. Birds do not have vertical rudders. They steer by twisting their tails and adjusting their wing feathers. A vertical fin is a purely man-made solution to the problem of stability in flight, a feature that is absolutely critical for any fixed-wing glider. If it is just a bird, why would an ancient artist, otherwise so attentive to naturalistic detail, add a feature that doesn't exist in nature? The debate moved from speculation to experimentation when modern aviation experts decided to put the design to the test. Aeronautical engineers constructed precise, scaled-up models of the Saqqara bird to see how it would perform in a wind tunnel and in free flight. The results were startling. The models did not just fall, they flew. With a little adjustment to the angle of the wing, the models demonstrated excellent glide capabilities. They were stable, handled well, and could carry a small payload. These tests proved conclusively that the object's shape is fundamentally aerodynamic. It is not merely a shape that looks like a plane, it is a shape that functions as a glider. This doesn't automatically prove ancient Egyptians were building aircraft, but it does prove they had stumbled upon a form that harnesses the basic principles of flight. So how do we reconcile these two opposing views? One possibility is that they are not opposites at all, but two sides of the same coin. It's entirely plausible that an ancient artisan, perhaps one who spent time watching birds soar on thermals over the Nile, intuitively understood that certain shapes were more stable in the air. He might have incorporated this observed principle into a religious carving, creating a falcon that didn't just represent flight, but whose very form captured the essence of stable, graceful soaring. The genius would be unconscious, a happy accident of design that resulted from keen observation of the natural world rather than a deliberate scientific inquiry into aerodynamics. The Saqqara bird, then, would be a magnificent example of empirical knowledge, knowing that something works without fully understanding the scientific why behind it. The true mystery of the Saqqara bird may never be fully resolved. We lack any written records or diagrams from its creator explaining their intent. It exists in a vacuum, a single, enigmatic data point. But its power lies in the questions it forces us to ask about the nature of innovation and discovery. It challenges our assumption that technological progress is a straight, unbroken line. Is it possible that the principles of flight were understood, at least in a rudimentary form, and then lost for centuries? The Sakara bird doesn't offer easy answers, but it does offer a thrilling possibility. It stands as a silent, wooden testament to human curiosity, a reminder that the desire to slip the bonds of earth and soar among the heavens is an ancient dream, one that might have found expression in the workshop of an Egyptian craftsman over 2,000 years ago. Moving from the soaring possibilities of the Sakara bird, we now turn to an artifact that serves as a powerful cautionary tale, a story that reminds us of the critical importance of looking beyond a sensational surface. In 1961, while collecting rocks in the Coso Mountains of California, a group of gem and mineral hunters were cracking open what they believed to be a geode, a hollow rock often lined with beautiful crystals. Inside one particularly hard nodule, however, they found something that defied all expectation. Instead of a glittering cavity of quartz or amethyst, they discovered a mechanical object. It appeared to be a piece of metal encircled by a ceramic ring, all held within a hexagonal housing. The object was encased so perfectly within the stone that it seemed to have been there for an immense period of time. This was the Coso artifact, and its initial interpretation was nothing short of explosive. A modern-looking device found inside a rock supposedly 500,000 years old. The initial analysis only fueled the mystery. When the finders had the object X-rayed, the image revealed a metal shaft with a spring or helix at one end, closely resembling a contemporary spark plug. The immediate, breathtaking conclusion was that this was evidence of a highly advanced prehistoric civilization, perhaps even visitors from another world, who had left behind technology that became entombed in stone over eons. The story was a perfect fit for the burgeoning, ancient astronaut genre, and it quickly captured the public imagination, becoming a celebrated piece of evidence for those who believed mainstream archaeology was ignoring its most inexplicable finds. It was presented as an out-of-place artifact that could single-handedly rewrite human history. The truth, as it often does, emerged through diligent, skeptical investigation. The key to unraveling the mystery lay in understanding what the rock actually was. The finders had assumed it was a geode, but geodes form in specific volcanic or sedimentary conditions and have a very distinct hollow structure. Experts who examined the case quickly pointed out that the rock encasing the object was not a geode at all. It was a concretion, a hard, compact mass that forms when mineral cement precipitates and binds sediment together around a nucleus. This process, as we saw with the London hammer, can occur relatively quickly under the right chemical conditions. The object wasn't millions of years old, it was merely the nucleus around which a hard shell of minerals had formed. The next step was to identify the object itself. Spark plug collectors who saw the X-rays and photographs almost immediately recognized it. The distinctive hexagonal shape and the internal structure were a match for a champion spark plug, a common model used in early 20th century automobiles. Specifically, it was identified as a champion number 4, a type that was manufactured from the 1920s through the 1970s. This identification was the final nail in the coffin for the ancient civilization theory. The object wasn't a relic from a lost age. It was a piece of early 20th century industrial debris, likely dropped or discarded by a miner or a motorist in the Coso Mountains decades earlier. The final piece of the puzzle was explaining how a spark plug from the 1920s could have become so thoroughly encased in rock. The area where it was found, the Coso Mountains, is geologically active with natural hot springs. The mineral-rich waters in the region are perfect for accelerating the process of concretion formation. The spark plug lying in the dirt near such a spring would have acted as a perfect nucleus. Over a period of just a few decades, the flowing water could have deposited layers of hard minerals like iron oxide and manganese around it, creating a rock-hard shell that gave the convincing appearance of immense age. What seemed like an impossibility was simply a demonstration of nature's ability to work surprisingly fast. The legacy of the Khoso artifact is far more valuable than the artifact itself ever was. It stands as a classic case study in the importance of skeptical inquiry and the scientific method. It teaches us that extraordinary claims do, in fact, require extraordinary evidence, and that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The initial interpretation was driven by a desire for the extraordinary, while the correct explanation came from a methodical process of elimination and identification using available expertise. This isn't to say that all mysteries are hoaxes or mistakes, but that a responsible approach to history requires us to rule out the mundane before leaping to the miraculous. The Khoso artifact reminds us that the real wonder isn't always in finding proof of ancient astronauts, but in understanding the incredible and often overlooked processes of our own natural world, which can conspire to create mysteries worthy of any science fiction tale. While the Khoso artifact reminds us to apply healthy skepticism, some ancient records challenge us with mysteries that are not so easily dismissed. Imagine a single, crumbling clay tablet that documents the reigns of kings, not for decades but for millennia. This is the Sumerian king list, an artifact that tantalizingly blends accepted history with what seems like pure mythology, forcing us to question how ancient civilizations perceived time, power, and their own origins. Discovered by scholars at the dawn of the 20th century at various sites across Iraq, including the ancient city of Nippur, this list exists in several versions, with the most complete dating back to around 2000 BC. It meticulously records the cities of Sumer and the rulers who held sway over them, presenting a continuous narrative of kingship from the very beginning, which it describes as a time when kingship first descended from heaven. The initial entries on this list are where the historical record takes a breathtaking leap into the fantastical. The first 8 kings are said to have ruled for periods that are simply incomprehensible to our modern minds. We are told of Ululim, the first king of Eridu, who reigned for 28,800 years. His successor, Alaljar, ruled for 36,000 years. The list continues in this vein, with reigns lasting tens of thousands of years, culminating in the longest reign of all, that of Enmen-Luwana, a king of Bad Tabira who is credited with a staggering 43,200 years on the throne. The math is staggering. The cumulative reign of these first 8 antediluvian or pre-flood kings adds up to 241,200 years of rule. After a great flood, which mirrors the accounts found in later texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the biblical story of Noah, the reigns become somewhat more reasonable, though still incredibly long, gradually decreasing to periods of centuries and eventually settling into the more historically verifiable reigns of decades. So how do we interpret these impossible numbers? The most widely accepted explanation among historians and archaeologists is that these immense time spans are not literal history but profound mythological symbolism. In this view, the length of a reign was not a measure of years but a measure of importance, power, and divine favor. A king who is said to have ruled for 36,000 years was not a man who lived that long. He was a figure of such legendary, godlike status that his influence was considered eternal, his reign metaphorically stretching back to the dawn of time itself. These incredibly long reigns could also be a literary device meant to separate a sacred, mythical, golden age from the more familiar human history that followed the Great Flood. The steadily decreasing reign lengths after the flood could symbolize a gradual distancing of humanity from the gods, a slow fading of that primordial, divine connection. A more practical, though still debated, theory involves mathematical and calendrical miscalculation. the Sumerians used a sexagesimal number system based on the number 60, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour today. It is possible that the original units of time recorded were not solar years as we understand them, but something else entirely. Perhaps shorter seasonal cycles, months, or even purely symbolic numerical units. Later scribes, copying and translating these ancient records centuries after they were first written, might have misinterpreted these units as full years, creating the colossal numbers we see on the list. Another mathematical idea is that these numbers held astronomical or astrological significance, corresponding to the precession of the equinoxes or other long-term celestial cycles, encoding advanced astronomical knowledge within a kingly narrative. Perhaps the most intriguing interpretation moves beyond mistake and metaphor to consider a fundamental difference in how time itself was perceived. For us, time is linear and absolute, measured by precise clocks and calendars. For ancient Mesopotamians, time may have been more cyclical and qualitative. A year of a god-king's rule in a mythical era might not have been quantifiable in the same way. Their concept of history was likely not about recording factual chronology for its own sake, but about establishing legitimacy and connecting the current ruling dynasty to an unbroken chain of power that originated with the gods. The king list was less a history book and more a political and religious document, designed to show that the institution of kingship was divinely ordained and eternal, thereby legitimizing the authority of the king who currently held the throne. The immense ages of the first kings served as undeniable proof of their supernatural origin, grounding the power of contemporary rulers in a timeless, sacred past. The Sumerian king list doesn't just record names and numbers, it opens a window into the mind of an ancient civilization. It shows us a world where the lines between history, myth, and propaganda were beautifully and intentionally blurred. It challenges our modern, empirical need for factual accuracy and invites us to understand history as the Sumerians themselves might have, as a tapestry woven from threads of truth, legend, and divine purpose. The list isn't a flawed attempt at our kind of history. It is a perfect example of theirs, a masterful blend of fact and symbol that serve to define their world and their place within it. It remains a powerful reminder that the past is not always what it seems, and that sometimes the greatest historical value lies not in the literal truth of a record, but in what it reveals about the people who wrote it and the profound ways they understood their universe. In the rolling farmland of Elbert County, Georgia, a monument of stark gray granite once stood that was neither ancient nor born of a known civilization. Yet it captivated and disturbed the modern world in equal measure. Erected under a veil of secrecy in 1980, the Georgia Guidestones were a collection of 6 massive granite slabs, weighing over 110 tons in total, arranged with astronomical precision. They were often called America's Stonehenge, but unlike its ancient predecessor, this monument came with an explicit, and to many, a deeply unsettling message for humanity. The stones were inscribed with 10 guiding principles or commandments, translated into 8 of the world's major languages: English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Hebrew, Hindi, and Swahili. These were not the gentle suggestions of a bygone era. They were a bold, cryptic manifesto for a future world order, and their anonymous authorship only fueled intense speculation and fear. The mystery began with their commission. A well-dressed, articulate man using the pseudonym R.C. Christian approached the Elberton Granite Finishing Company, representing a small group of loyal Americans who wished to remain anonymous. He paid for the entire project upfront and explained that the monument was meant to function as a compass, calendar, and clock, but also to serve as a guide for humanity in a post-apocalyptic world. The 10 guidelines carved into the stone were stark and provocative. They called for maintaining the global human population under 500 million to live in perpetual balance with nature. They advocated for guiding reproduction wisely, valuing fitness and diversity. They spoke of unifying humanity with a new universal language and of governing with tempered reason, balancing personal rights with social duties. The first and perhaps most famous directive simply read, "Maintain humanity under 500,000,000 in perpetual balance with nature." To many, this sounded less like a guide for survival and more like a chilling blueprint for mass depopulation. For over 4 decades, the Guidestones stood as a physical Rorschach test. For some, they were a noble, rational call for global stewardship, a warning against the perils of overpopulation and environmental destruction. They saw the messages as a hopeful, if severe, plan to avoid a potential planetary collapse. For others, particularly those in conspiracy and nationalist circles, the stones were something far more sinister. They were evidence of a shadowy globalist elite, a secret society like the Illuminati or the Rosicrucians, plotting to drastically reduce the world's population and impose a single world government. The choice of languages was seen as a clue to the intended New World Order, and the astronomical alignments were interpreted as evidence of occult or pagan rituals. The monument became a pilgrimage site for both curious tourists and ardent protesters, a symbol of the deep ideological divides in modern society, the mystery of art. See, Christians' true identity became a cottage industry of its own. Many theories pointed to figures associated with the Rosicrucian movement, a secretive esoteric order, noting that the name was a direct reference to Christian Rosencreutz, the legendary founder of Rosicrucianism. Others speculated it was the work of a wealthy eccentric, or a group of futurists and environmentalists who genuinely believed they were leaving a crucial message for a future civilization that would need to rebuild from scratch. A book, The Georgia Guidestones, America's Most Mysterious Monument, was published in the early 90s by a man who claimed to know the true sponsors but maintained their anonymity, only deepening the enigma. The lack of a clear author meant the stone's message existed in a vacuum, allowing every interpreter to project their own hopes and fears onto the cold granite. The story of the Georgia Guidestones reached its dramatic and violent conclusion on the morning of July 6, 2022. In the early hours, a security camera captured a car pulling up to the site, followed by a massive explosion that shattered one of the enormous slabs. Later that day, authorities deemed the structure too unstable to remain standing and safely demolished the rest. The act of destruction was instantly investigated as a deliberate bombing. While no group officially claimed responsibility, the event was widely seen as the culmination of years of escalating fringe rhetoric and targeted threats against the monument, which had become a potent symbol of everything certain groups feared and despised. Its destruction was celebrated by some as a blow against globalism and a victory for freedom, while mourned by others as the loss of a unique, thought-provoking piece of modern art and a warning from history. The bombing did not erase the Guidestones, it immortalized them. The physical monument is gone, but its legend has only grown, its fragments now relics themselves. The mystery of its creators remains unsolved, its message now amplified by its violent end. It stands as a powerful, modern testament to the enduring power of artifacts to provoke, to terrify, and to make us question not only the past but the future we are building. It was a mystery manufactured in the 20th century that challenged us to confront the most pressing questions of the 21st. A stone message whose final, unspoken commandment was perhaps that ideas once carved in stone are far harder to destroy than the stone itself. Scattered across the vast expanse of what was once the Roman Empire, from the wet, misty hills of northern Britain to the sun-baked plains of Hungary, archaeologists have unearthed one of antiquity's most charming and inscrutable puzzles. These are the Roman dodecahedrons, beautiful, hollow objects crafted from bronze or sometimes stone, each with 12 perfectly flat, pentagonal faces. Every face has a circular hole of varying diameter, and each of the 12 corners is adorned with a small knob or ball. They range in size from a golf ball to a large apple, and while over 100 of them have been found, not a single one has been discovered in Italy, the very heart of the empire. Most intriguing of all, there is no written record, no fresco, no mosaic, and no surviving oral history that even hints at what these precisely made objects were for. They are a complete blank in the historical record, a silent question from the past that has inspired a spectacular array of answers. One of the most enduring and practical theories suggests they were a tool for hand knitting. The idea is that a skilled craftsperson could use the dodecahedron to create gloves, specifically to form the perfectly sized fingers. By wrapping yarn around the knobs and threading it through the different sized holes, one could quickly produce consistently sized tubes of fabric. This theory is appealing because it solves a practical problem and connects to a known Roman industry in textiles. However, skeptics point out that not a single dodecahedron has ever been found with any trace of yarn or fiber attached to it, which would be almost expected if it were a dedicated tool for that purpose. Furthermore, the varying hole sizes on a single object seem unnecessary for knitting just one size of glove finger, though they could have been used for creating different parts of a garment. A more celestial theory proposes these objects were sophisticated astronomical instruments. The different hole sizes could correspond to the perceived sizes of stars or planets from Earth, or be used for calculating optimal planting dates by measuring the angle of sunlight through the holes at different times of the year. A trained observer might hold the dodecahedron up to the sky to sight specific constellations or measure the solstices. The problem with this idea is the sheer variation in the objects themselves. Their sizes are not standardized, and the hole diameters vary wildly from one dodecahedron to the next. If they were precision instruments for tracking heavenly bodies, one would expect a much greater degree of uniformity in their construction, much like the standardized calibration of Roman weights and measures. Perhaps the most creatively satisfying theory is that they were religious or ritualistic objects. In this view, the dodecahedron, with its 12 faces, could represent the 12 signs of the zodiac or other cosmic symbols. Its geometric perfection might have held spiritual significance, used by priests for divination or as a sacred symbol in the worship of a particular deity. The fact that many were found buried carefully in coin hoards or in grave sites suggests they were valued possessions, perhaps talismans of good fortune or status, symbols within a specific cult or mystery school. The lack of any written mention could then be explained by the secretive nature of such religious practices, whose rituals were meant to be hidden from the uninitiated. A newer and remarkably pragmatic theory has emerged from the field of engineering. Some researchers suggest the dodecahedrons were used as calibration tools for the Roman military, specifically for standardizing the size of water pipes. A soldier could thread a leather water pipe through the holes to ensure it met a specific diameter standard, with the knobs providing a grip to pull it through and smooth the seams. The different holes on one device would allow a single craftsman to check and work on pipes of multiple standard sizes. This theory elegantly ties the object to the Roman genius for logistics and infrastructure, though it doesn't fully explain why these objects are often found far from major military outposts or engineering projects and are sometimes made of precious metals. In the end, the true genius of the Roman dodecahedron may lie in its very mystery. It refuses to be pigeonholed. Unlike a spearhead or a cooking pot, its function isn't immediately obvious because it wasn't a tool of survival, but perhaps a tool of intellect, craft, or spirit. It stands as a delightful reminder that the past is not a simple puzzle to be solved, but a complex tapestry where some threads remain beautifully, wonderfully loose. It invites us to wonder, to project our own ideas onto its geometric form, and to appreciate that even a civilization as meticulously documented as Rome still held onto a few secrets, leaving behind these enigmatic bronze puzzles for us to ponder across the centuries. Deep within the temple complex of Dendera, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, lies a crypt adorned with carvings that have ignited one of the most passionate debates in alternative history. The walls are covered in classic Egyptian imagery, but one series of reliefs in particular stands out. They show a large, elongated object reminiscent of a giant light bulb in its shape. Inside this bulb stretches a snake, its head pointing toward one end, while a cable-like tube connects the base to a box upon which a god is kneeling. A second figure, seemingly a priest or another deity, holds the object steady. To many who first see it, the interpretation seems obvious. This is a depiction of an ancient electric light bulb, complete with its power source and a filament represented by the snake. The so-called Dendera light appears to be a clear-cut case of advanced, forgotten technology. This electrifying hypothesis hinges on a few key visual elements. The bulb-shaped object does not resemble any typical religious symbol. The snake inside is held rigid and straight, unlike the undulating serpents seen elsewhere in Egyptian art, which could be interpreted as a filament glowing with electrical current. The cable leading to the box looks functional, and the god attached to it could be seen as the operator or the source of power. Proponents of this theory argue that such a device would explain how the Egyptians achieved the incredible feat of illuminating the deep, windowless interiors of their tombs and temples, places where soot from torches or oil lamps would have damaged the elaborate artwork, yet no trace of such residue has been found. The idea offers a neat, technological solution to a long-standing practical mystery. Egyptologists and mainstream archaeologists, however, offer a profoundly different interpretation, one deeply rooted in the well-established context of Egyptian mythology. They identify the scene not as a technical diagram, but as a symbolic representation of a foundational creation myth. The object is not a light bulb, but a giant lotus flower, a symbol of creation and rebirth. The snake is not a filament, but the snake god Harsomptus, an aspect of the deity associated with the dawn and the first sunrise. He is being born from the lotus, which itself is emerging from the primordial waters, represented by the box that is actually a symbol for those waters. The entire scene is a spiritual allegory for the moment of creation, the dawning of the first light of the world, a divine, metaphysical light, not an electric one. This mythological reading is supported by the surrounding hieroglyphs and parallel imagery throughout the temple. The entire temple at Dendera is a tapestry of cosmic symbolism, detailing the journey of the sun god Ra through the sky and the underworld. The cable is more likely a stylized representation of a lotus stem or a ceremonial rope, and the supporting figures are gods participating in the sacred event. To interpret this isolated image without its immense cultural and religious context is, from an academic perspective, a fundamental error. It would be like a future archaeologist finding a stained glass window of the Nativity star and concluding it was a schematic for a high-powered laser. The debate ultimately highlights a classic clash of perspectives, a literal technological interpretation versus a symbolic mythological one. The anlight bulb theory appeals to a modern sensibility that seeks practical answers and is fascinated by the possibility of lost advanced civilizations. The mainstream view asks us to step into the mind of an ancient Egyptian, for whom the line between the physical and the spiritual was blurred, and for whom the most important, light, was the eternal cycle of the sun, a divine force that sustained all life. The Dendera relief doesn't showcase a forgotten technology for lighting a room, but rather a brilliant technology for illuminating the soul, a complex and beautiful metaphor carved in stone to explain their place in the cosmos. It remains a powerful reminder that our ancestors saw the world through a different lens, one where myth was not a primitive explanation for science, but a profound explanation for existence itself. But if the Dendera light invites debate over ancient technology, our next artifact sparks a fiery controversy that spans continents and rewrites the entire history of exploration. In 1929, while cataloguing the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul, a German theologian named Gustav Adolf Diesmann made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the world of cartography. He found a map drawn on gazelle skin parchment, signed by an Ottoman Turkish admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis and dated to the year 1519. On its own, that was a fascinating find, an early 16th century map. But as scholars began to study it, they realized it depicted coastlines that no European in 1519 should have known about. Most astonishingly, it seemed to show the northern coastline of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered for another 300 years. And it showed it not as it appears today, buried under miles of ice, but as it might look if that ice were gone. The map itself is a thing of beauty and confusion. Piri Reis wrote extensive notes in the margins, explaining that he had compiled it from multiple source maps, including some he described as being from the time of Alexander the Great. He specifically cited using charts from Christopher Columbus, which alone would make the map priceless. It accurately details the eastern coast of South America and the western coast of Africa. But it's the southern landmass that ignites the firestorm. The map depicts a landmass that appears to connect to South America, with detailed coastlines, rivers, and mountain ranges. To many, this is an unmistakable representation of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, but with a startling lack of its modern ice cap. Proponents of the ancient civilization theory, like Professor Charles Hapgood, argue that this proves the existence of a pre-classical, global seafaring civilization with advanced knowledge of cartography. They posit that this ancient culture must have mapped the world, including an ice-free Antarctica, tens of thousands of years ago, and that fragments of their knowledge were preserved and passed down through the ages, eventually finding their way into the hands of Piri Reis. The implications of this theory are staggering. For Antarctica to be ice-free and habitable enough to map its coastline, the map would have to be based on source information that is at least 6,000 years old, from before the end of the last glacial period. Some estimates push that date back even further, to around 12,000 years ago. This would mean that a sophisticated, unknown civilization with ocean-going vessels existed in deep antiquity, possessing a level of science and navigation that we don't credit to any culture until the modern era. It's a narrative that captures the imagination, suggesting a lost chapter of human history filled with advanced explorers whose achievements were wiped out by a cataclysm, leaving only their charts behind as a cryptic clue. Mainstream cartographers and historians, however, offer a much different and more grounded interpretation. They point out that the map is riddled with significant errors that argue against it being a precise scientific document. The Caribbean islands are wildly misplaced and the scale of the Atlantic is distorted. Most importantly, they argue that the controversial southern landmass is not Antarctica at all. Instead, it is far more likely a speculative and composite depiction of a hypothetical terra australis incognita, the unknown southern land, a concept that was common in European geography from classical times right through the Renaissance. Cartographers had long believed a large southern continent must exist to balance the landmass of the northern hemisphere. This mythical land was often drawn with a rough, ambiguous coastline, and it frequently appeared on maps of the period, including those that Piri Reis cited as his sources. The rivers and mountains seen on the southern part of the Piri Reis map could easily be the result of artistic license, charting errors, or the misinterpretation of accounts from early explorers who may have cited the distant, ice-covered landmass and described it poorly. Furthermore, the map shows no sign of the Drake Passage, the body of water that separates South America from Antarctica. If the map were truly based on ancient knowledge of an ice-free Antarctica, this critical seaway would almost certainly be present. Its absence suggests the cartographers simply extended the coast of South America southward, merging it with the imagined southern continent, a common practice at the time. The most plausible explanation is that Piri Reis was exactly who he said he was, a brilliant compiler. He was a synthesizer of knowledge, pulling from Portuguese and Spanish charts of the New World, Arab maps of the Atlantic, and perhaps even ancient Greek or Roman sources that discussed the concept of a southern land. He wove these fragments together into a single, cohesive document, creating a map that was state-of-the-art for its time, but still reflected the limits and misconceptions of early 16th century geography. The Piri Reis map is not a window into a hyper-advanced prehistoric world, but rather a stunning snapshot of the moment when the old world of myth and the new world of empirical discovery collided. It represents the best guess of a brilliant admiral working with the incomplete puzzle pieces he had available, a testament to human curiosity and the enduring power of the unknown to inspire both our greatest discoveries and our most captivating myths. Nestled among the volcanic peaks of West Java, Indonesia, lies a site that looks at first glance like a hill swallowed by an ancient forest, but this is no ordinary hill. Gunung Padang, which means mountain of light or mountain of enlightenment in the local Sundanese language, is a terraced megalithic complex that has become the epicenter of one of the most intense and controversial debates in modern archaeology. For centuries, locals have revered it as a sacred place. To visitors, it appears as a series of 5 ascending stone terraces, walls, and pathways built from columnar basalt, a volcanic rock that naturally fractures into sharp geometric pillars. The conventional explanation has long been that it is a 2,000 to 3,000 year old site, perhaps a place of worship or a fortress from a relatively recent prehistoric period. But a radical new theory proposes something far more extraordinary, that this hill is not a natural formation at all, but the remains of the world's oldest pyramid, its construction beginning an almost unbelievable 20,000 years ago. The controversy erupted into the global spotlight largely due to the work of a team led by geologist Dr. Danny Hillman Natawajoja. Starting around 2011, his team began conducting extensive surveys of the site using advanced subsurface imaging techniques like ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and electrical resistivity measurements. What these technologies seemed to reveal was astonishing. The team reported that the hill was not solid earth. Instead, they described a complex, layered internal structure with large chambers, cavities, and what appeared to be multiple layers of construction buried deep beneath the surface. Core drilling samples extracted from hundreds of meters deep seemed to show that these internal structures were made of worked, shaped, and arranged rock, not natural geological formations. The most explosive claim came from radiocarbon dating of organic soil samples taken from between the rocks deep within the hill. These samples, from layers dozens of meters down, returned dates that were progressively older the deeper they went, with the most ancient materials dating back an incredible 22 to 27,000 years. If correct, this would mean Gunung Padang was built not just centuries, but millennia before the Great Pyramids of Giza, at a time when mainstream archaeology tells us humans were simple hunter-gatherers, incapable of such monumental, organized construction. Unsurprisingly, these claims have been met with fierce resistance and deep skepticism from the vast majority of the international archaeological community. The criticisms are multifaceted and strike at the very heart of the scientific method. First, there is the issue of the radiocarbon dating. Skeptics argue that dating organic material found in the soil between rocks does not date the construction of the rocks themselves. Soil can naturally seep and accumulate in cracks and cavities over thousands of years. A piece of charcoal found 60 meters down could be from a natural wildfire that occurred 20,000 years ago, long before any human ever arrived to stack stones on that spot. It does not prove that a human placed that rock there at that time. To date the structure, you would need to date material that was clearly and unambiguously related to its construction, like mortar made from organic materials, which has not been found. Second, geologists point out that the site is located on a natural volcanic hill made of weathered andesite and basalt. The columnar joints that form the terraces are a perfectly natural phenomenon in volcanic rock caused by cooling and contraction. While humans have clearly moved and arranged many of these stones on the surface, the argument is that the team has misinterpreted complex natural geology for sophisticated artificial construction deep underground. The debate over Gunung Padang is more than just an academic disagreement over dates and rocks. It's a clash between two fundamentally different ways of interpreting the past. For proponents of the ancient pyramid theory, the site is revolutionary proof of a lost, advanced civilization from the last ice age, a discovery that would force us to completely rewrite the history of human civilization and its capabilities. It fits into a wider narrative popularized by figures like Graham Hancock, which suggests a great, sophisticated culture was wiped out by a cataclysmic event and its survivors ceded knowledge to younger civilizations. For mainstream archaeologists, accepting such a claim requires extraordinary evidence that simply hasn't been provided. They see the theory as a classic case of confirmation bias, where data is interpreted to fit a pre-existing, sensational conclusion while ignoring more mundane geological explanations. They worry it disrespects the genuine achievements of the known cultures of Southeast Asia by attributing their work to a mysterious, unknown predecessor. Beyond the fiery debate, the true, accepted history of Gunung Padang is fascinating in its own right. Even if the core of the hill is natural, the surface terraces are undeniably a massive and impressive megalithic site. The effort required to shape and move these multi-ton basalt columns and arrange them into walls, terraces, and staircases would have been enormous for any society. Its purpose remains speculative, but it likely served as a central place for communal rituals, astronomical observation, or as a territorial marker for a complex, stratified society. Its construction, whether 2,000 or 20,000 years ago, signifies a profound connection to the landscape and a sophisticated understanding of stoneworking. The controversy has undoubtedly brought international attention and tourism to the region, fueling a national pride in Indonesia's deep and complex history. However, it has also led to political complications, with the research becoming intertwined with nationalistic narratives and excavation efforts continuing despite concerns from many archaeologists about the methods being used. Gunung Padang stands as a powerful symbol of the enduring mystery of our past. It challenges us to remain open to new discoveries while also adhering to the rigorous standards of evidence that define good science. Whether it is ultimately proven to be a natural hill modified over millennia by humans, or the staggering remnant of a forgotten chapter in human history, its value is immense. It reminds us that the story of humanity is far from complete, and that there are still places on Earth that hold secrets capable of shaking the foundations of what we think we know. The Mountain of Light continues to guard its deepest truths, waiting for the day when science, patience, and perhaps a little luck will finally illuminate them for all to see. Buried in the roots of a trembling aspen tree on a Minnesota farm in 1898, a Swedish immigrant named Olof Oman unearthed a slab of greywacke stone that would ignite a century of fierce debate. The 200-pound stone was covered in strange, angular carvings that were soon identified as runes, the ancient alphabet of the Vikings. When translated, the inscription told a startling story. It read, 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on a journey of exploration from Vinland very far west. We had camped by 2 skerries 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were out fishing one day. When we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and dead. AVM save us from evil. It was dated 1362, over 130 years before Columbus set sail. This was the Kensington runestone, and it promised to rewrite the history of North America, suggesting that Norse explorers had ventured deep into the continent's heartland. The initial wave of academic excitement was quickly doused by a torrent of scholarly scorn. Linguists and rhunologists from Scandinavia almost universally declared it a hoax. They pointed to a host of glaring problems with the inscription. The runic alphabet used was an odd mixture containing runes from different centuries and regions, some of which would not have been used together. The language itself was a bizarre blend of Old Swedish and modern 19th century Swedish, peppered with English words spelled phonetically with runes. The phrase "from evil" at the end, for instance, was written not in Old Norse but in a distinctly modern Swedish form. Critics argued that these anomalies were the clumsy fingerprints of a forger, someone familiar with runes but not an expert, who had cobbled together an inscription from available books and made critical errors that a genuine 14th century carver would never have made. The most compelling evidence for a hoax often circles back to the discoverer himself. Olof Oman was a well-read immigrant who owned books on rhunology and had a known interest in his Scandinavian heritage. To skeptics, he had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. The motive, they suggest, wasn't necessarily financial gain but a desire for prestige, to carve a place for his people in the grand narrative of American history by proving their ancestors had been there first. The fact that the stone was found on his own property, conveniently right in the path of where a fence post was to be placed, added a layer of theatrical suspicion. For the academic establishment, the case was closed. The Kensington runestone was a charming but obvious fake, a product of nostalgic fraud from a Minnesota farmer. Yet the stone refused to fade into obscurity. A stubborn band of researchers, historians, and amateur sleuths continued to defend its authenticity, amassing a counter-argument that, while not universally accepted, is far more intricate than often acknowledged. Their first point addresses the linguistic anomalies. They argue that the language on the stone isn't a flawed modern Swedish, but could represent a unique dialect of Old Norse spoken by an isolated group of explorers, far from the linguistic centers of Scandinavia. They point to the fact that our understanding of 14th century Scandinavian languages is based on formal documents, not the vernacular of itinerant explorers who would have been influenced by other cultures and languages. The oddities in this view aren't mistakes but evidence of a genuine, living language in transition. The physical evidence of the stone itself also presents puzzling questions. Geologists who have examined the weathering of the inscription have stated that the carvings appear significantly older than the late 19th century. The grooves are deeply weathered with a patina that matches the rest of the stone's surface, suggesting they were exposed to the elements for centuries, not just a few years. Furthermore, the tree under which it was found was an aspen estimated to be at least 40 years old. If the stone was a hoax, Oman would have had to plant it decades before he discovered it, a long con for which there is no evidence and no clear motive. This physical evidence doesn't prove the runes are from 1362, but it does make the case for a simple 1898 hoax considerably more complicated. The search for context has also led proponents to look beyond the stone itself. They point to the Mandan tribe of North Dakota, a Native American group that early European explorers noted had startlingly light-eyed members and cultural practices, including building circular, sod-covered homes reminiscent of Norse architecture. While DNA evidence has largely debunked the theory of significant Norse genetic infusion, the cultural parallels remain a topic of fascination. More concretely, the discovery of the Norse settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland in the 1960s proved that the Viking sagas telling of voyages to Vinland were true. This opened the door, however slightly, to the possibility that further expeditions could have traveled inland via the Great Lakes and river systems, just as the Kensington inscription describes. The Kensington runestone endures not as a solved case, but as a historical Rorschach test. What you see in its carved lines often depends on what you want to believe. For skeptics, it is a textbook example of a hoax, its errors too glaring to ignore. For proponents, it is a misunderstood, genuine artifact, dismissed by an arrogant academic establishment unwilling to reconsider its assumptions. It represents the eternal clash between strict scholarly standards, which demand impeccable evidence, and the messy, unpredictable nature of real-world discovery. The stone's true power may lie not in proving who reached America first, but in its ability to keep us questioning, to force us to admit that the map of the past is still being drawn, and that sometimes the most compelling Chinese letter mysteries are those that steadfastly refuse to surrender all their secrets. In a small private museum in the Peruvian town of Ica, you'll find a collection that defies everything we know about natural history. Lining the shelves are thousands of stones, some as small as a fist, others large enough to fill a tabletop. Their surfaces are covered in intricate, fine-line engravings depicting scenes that are, by all accounts, impossible. Men use telescopes to gaze at comets. Surgeons perform complex medical operations like heart transplants and cesarean sections. And most astonishing of all, human figures are shown in direct contact with dinosaurs, fighting them, riding them, and even domesticating them as if they were common livestock. These are the Ica stones, and their imagery suggests a history of Earth where humans and dinosaurs coexisted, a timeline that directly contradicts millions of years of established paleontological and evolutionary science. The story of how they came to be and why people still believe in them is a masterclass in the power of a compelling narrative to override even the most definitive evidence. The modern story of the stones begins in the 1960s with a local farmer named Basilio Ashuya. He became the primary source for these artifacts, selling them to Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquia, a physician and professor at the University of Lima who became their most passionate and dedicated collector. Dr. Cabrera was utterly captivated. He amassed over 15,000 stones and developed a complex theory to explain their origins. He proposed that they were a vast, ancient library left by a superior, extraterrestrial civilization he called the Glyptoliths. This advanced race, he believed, had genetically engineered humans and dinosaurs to coexist, and the stones were a record of their knowledge, intended to survive some great cataclysm that wiped their creators out. For Cabrera, the medical scenes weren't just curiosities. They were proof that this lost civilization possessed knowledge that modern medicine was only just rediscovering. His book, The Message of the Engraved Stones of Ica, laid out this elaborate cosmology, and the stones quickly became a sensation among those fascinated by ancient astronauts and alternative history. The sheer volume and consistency of the stones presented a seemingly formidable challenge to skeptics. How could a simple, uneducated farmer produce thousands of intricately engraved stones, all maintaining a consistent artistic style and depicting such a wide range of complex, anachronistic subjects? The answer, it turned out, was both simple and disappointing. Facing growing international scrutiny and accusations of fraud, Basilio Ashuya confessed in a 1974 interview with the BBC. He demonstrated exactly how he and his wife created the stones. They would acquire smooth, rounded andesite stones from the nearby riverbed. The engravings were made using a simple dental drill with a hardened steel needle, and the freshly carved lines were then covered with a paste of crushed carbon and boot polish to simulate the dark patina of great age. This paste was easily washed off to reveal the sharp, modern marks underneath. Ashuya stated his motive was straightforward. He could sell the engraved stones to tourists for far more money than he could earn from farming. He even noted that he got many of his ideas from comic books, textbooks, and popular magazines. With the creator's confession and demonstration, the case appeared to be definitively closed. It was a hoax, a lucrative cottage industry built on forgery. Yet, in a twist that is almost more fascinating than the stones themselves, the story didn't end there. Ashuya later recanted his confession, claiming he had lied to the authorities to avoid a prison sentence for selling archaeological artifacts, which is illegal in Peru. This recantation, however flimsy, was all that true believers needed to reignite the mystery. They argued that the government had pressured him into a false confession to protect the orthodox historical narrative. The true power of the Ica stones was never in their authenticity as ancient artifacts, but in their potency as modern symbols. They became a perfect Rorschach test for belief, a canvas upon which people could project their deepest convictions about the past. For creationists, the stones are touted as undeniable proof that the Earth is only thousands of years old, not billions, and that humans did indeed walk alongside dinosaurs as described in a literal interpretation of the Bible. They are held up as evidence that mainstream science is a dogmatic institution actively suppressing the truth. For ancient astronaut theorists, the stones are a library of lost knowledge, evidence of a time when extraterrestrials shared advanced technology with humanity. The detailed medical and astronomical scenes are cited as being far too sophisticated for a simple farmer to have invented, ignoring the fact that Ashuya was likely relaying concepts explained to him by the well-educated doctor. Cabrera, the stone's enduring appeal lies in this very resistance to evidence. They satisfy a deep human desire for a more mysterious, more exciting past, one where the timeline of history is not a settled fact but a thrilling secret waiting to be uncovered. The Ica stones ultimately serve as a powerful cautionary tale about the nature of evidence and the psychology of belief. They remind us that a compelling story, especially one that offers a sense of hidden truth and special knowledge, can be infinitely more attractive than a mundane reality. They show how easily confirmation bias can lead us to embrace evidence that supports our worldview while dismissing overwhelming proof to the contrary. Geologically, they are just river rocks. Artistically, they are clever fakes. But culturally, they are a monument to our endless fascination with the unknown, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most incredible stories aren't those carved in stone, but the ones we build around them long after the carving is done. Stretching an astonishing 230 feet long, the Bayeux Tapestry is a breathtaking feat of narrative art, far more than a simple decorative cloth. This magnificent embroidered chronicle, crafted in the 1170s, just a decade after the momentous events it portrays, unfolds the dramatic story of the Norman conquest of England, culminating in the legendary Battle of Hastings in 1066. But to view it merely as a Norman victory lap, a straightforward piece of propaganda commissioned by William the Conqueror's half-brother Bishop Odo, is to miss its deepest and most fascinating secrets. Woven into its colorful wool threads on linen are subtle, subversive messages that suggest its creators might have been sympathetic to the defeated Anglo-Saxons, embedding a coded commentary on invasion, loyalty, and tragedy within the official story. The tapestry's overall narrative is, on the surface, decisively pro-Norman. It begins with a promise of kingship made to William by the English ruler Edward the Confessor, and it follows the saga of Harold Godwinson's fateful trip to Normandy, his fateful oath of allegiance to William, likely sworn on holy relics, a moment the tapestry highlights with powerful visual emphasis, and his subsequent betrayal of that oath when he takes the English crown for himself. The climactic battle scenes are a masterclass in medieval storytelling, showing the Norman cavalry's brutal efficiency against the Saxon shield wall, the death of King Harold, and the eventual collapse of the English forces. The visual details are incredibly rich and provide invaluable historical insight, from the design of the longships that carried the Norman army across the Channel to the specific armor and weapons used in combat, offering a vivid window into 11th century warfare. Yet, a closer look reveals a startling layer of complexity and what many scholars argue is a deep undercurrent of empathy for the English. The most compelling evidence lies in the portrayal of the two main protagonists. William is shown as a strong, decisive leader, but he is also depicted ordering the burning of English homes, an act of harsh aggression. Harold, by contrast, is presented with surprising nuance. He is not a simple villain. He is shown saving 2 Norman soldiers from quicks, and early on, an act of heroism that seems out of place in a narrative meant to vilify him. His death scene is one of the most famous and debated images in the entire work. The Latin inscription above it reads simply, Harold Rex Interfectus Isti, here King Harold has been killed. But the image shows a figure with an arrow in his eye next to a man being cut down by a knight. This could be 2 moments of Harold's death shown sequentially, or it could imply a different, more complex end for the king. The overall effect is not one of triumph over a monster, but of solemnity and perhaps even pathos for a fallen monarch. This sympathetic tone has led many historians to propose that the actual embroiderers were likely highly skilled Anglo-Saxon artisans, probably from Canterbury, a renowned center of English needlework. While Norman patrons provided the overall outline and purpose, the hands that did the work may have found quiet ways to express their own grief and national pride. They filled the borders above and below the main narrative with scenes from Aesop's fables, stories about predators and prey, trickery and its consequences. These aren't random decorations, they serve as a biting Greek chorus, commenting on the main action with themes of broken promises and the brutal nature of power. Furthermore, the tapestry uniquely includes a scene found in no other Norman account, the journey of Harold's mother to the battlefield to search for the body of her son. This deeply human, grieving maternal figure adds an emotional weight that feels distinctly English, a poignant counterpoint to the triumphant Norman narrative. The miracle of the Bayeux tapestry is not just its artistic and historical value, but its sheer survival. For over 9 centuries, this fragile textile has endured through countless wars, revolutions, and moments of sheer neglect. It was nearly used as a wagon cover during the French Revolution and was later seized by Napoleon, who put it on display to inspire his own plans for invading England. During the Second World War, it was coveted by both the Nazis, who saw it as a symbol of Aryan conquest, and Heinrich Himmler, who had it studied before it was ultimately hidden in the basement of the Louvre for safekeeping. Its survival is a story of luck, shifting ownership, and a growing recognition of its priceless cultural worth, allowing it to endure as a truly unique document. It is a masterpiece that tells 2 stories at once: the official, victorious history of the conquerors, and the quiet, resilient, and deeply human story of the conquered, forever stitched together in a breathtaking panoramic drama of ambition, betrayal, and the high cost of empire. Of all the enigmatic crystal skulls that captured the world's imagination, one stands apart for its unparalleled beauty and the sheer audacity of the story surrounding it. This is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, a masterpiece of carved quartz so perfect it seems to defy the very hands that supposedly made it. Its story begins not in a museum ledger, but with a tale of high adventure worthy of Indiana Jones. The narrative, popularized for decades, tells of a 17-year-old girl named Anna Mitchell-Hedges, while accompanying her adoptive father, the British adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, on an expedition to British Honduras in the 1920s. She is said to have been exploring a temple atop the ancient Maya city of Lubuntan. As the story goes, the sun glinted off something in the rubble beneath a collapsed altar, and she reached down to pull out this stunning, life-sized crystal skull. It was a discovery made for Hollywood, a moment of pure serendipity that gifted the world its most famous and mysterious artifact. The skull itself is the reason the story proved so believable for so long. It is a breathtaking object carved from a single, flawless block of clear quartz crystal. Its dimensions are hauntingly lifelike, and its most astonishing feature is its separate, movable lower jaw, engineered with a perfect pivot and balance that allows it to open and close seamlessly. For those who believed it was ancient, this detachable jaw was the ultimate proof of its otherworldly craftsmanship. How could a primitive society, even one as advanced as the Maya, have achieved such a feat without modern tools? Proponents of its ancient origins pointed to the complete absence of any visible tool marks. Under magnification, none of the microscopic scratches and grooves left by metal tools or even diamond-tipped abrasives could be found. This led to wild speculation about lost technologies, perhaps even the use of powerful sonic vibrations or some form of acidic paste that could somehow melt rock with precision, techniques far beyond our current understanding. The Romantic narrative, however, began to develop serious cracks under scrutiny. Investigative journalists and historians could find no evidence that A. Mitchell Hedges was even in Lubonton in 1924, the year of the alleged discovery. More damningly, there were no photographs, no diary entries from other expedition members, and no mention of the spectacular find in any of Mitchell Hedges' own writings from the time. The skull simply did not appear in the public record until much later. The truth, it seems, is far less cinematic but much more plausible. Records indicate that the skull was actually purchased by Mitchell Hedges at a Sotheby's auction in London in 1943. The auction listing describes it clearly, and the buyer was none other than Mitchell Hedges himself, acting through an agent. He paid £400 for it, a significant sum at the time, but a pittance for what he would later claim was a priceless ancient relic. So if it wasn't made by the Maya who created it, and how did they achieve such perfection? The answer points not to the jungles of Central America, but to the workshops of 19th century Europe, specifically in Germany. The town of Idar-Obertum was a global hub for the lapidary arts, home to incredibly skilled gem cutters who supplied a booming market for curiosities and antiquities. These artisans, using a combination of hand-powered wheels, polished with increasingly fine abrasives like diamond or corundum dust, could achieve a level of polish that would appear tool mark-free to the naked eye. The movable jaw, while impressive, is a testament to their patient, meticulous skill, not to supernatural or alien technology. The skull was almost certainly one of these curiosities, likely based on popular illustrations of human skulls rather than a real anatomical model, destined for the private cabinet of a wealthy collector fascinated by the exotic and the mysterious. Despite being thoroughly debunked by anthropological and scientific analysis, the Mitchell Hedges skull refuses to relinquish its iconic status. Its power was never rooted in its provenance, but in what it represents, the perfect artifact. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest desires for a past filled with lost wisdom and advanced civilizations. It is a symbol of the unknown, an object so beautiful and so seemingly impossible that we want its story to be true. Anna Mitchell Hedges herself championed the skull's mystical properties until her death, claiming it had healing powers and the ability to reveal visions of the future. This enduring belief highlights a fascinating truth about human nature. Sometimes a powerful story and a beautiful object can hold more sway over our imagination than a stack of scientific papers. The Mitchell Hedges skull is a masterpiece not of the ancient Maya, but of human artistry and our eternal, irresistible attraction to a well-told tale. While the Mitchell Hedges skull captivated with its physical beauty and romantic discovery tale, our next artifact wields a different kind of power, the power of a line on a page to redraw the entire map of history. It's a simple piece of yellowed parchment, but the image it bears sent shockwaves through the academic world when it was revealed to the public in 1965. This is the Vinland map, and it appeared to be a medieval treasure of unimaginable importance, a world map drawn around the year 1440 that showed not only Europe, Africa, and Asia, but also a large landmass in the Western Atlantic labeled in Latin as Vinlandia Insula, the island of Vinland. If authentic, this was the earliest known cartographic representation of North America, created over 50 years before Columbus's voyage and providing stunning corroboration that the Viking voyages to the New World, as described in the Norse sagas, were known to the wider medieval world. The map's provenance was a story straight out of a bibliophile's thriller. It was discovered bound inside the cover of a medieval manuscript known as the Historia Tartarorum, a genuine 15th century work. The find was announced by a team from Yale University, backed by the wealthy benefactor Paul Mellon, who had purchased it. The timing was impeccable, coming just a few years after the confirmed Norse settlement at Elance Aux Meadows in Newfoundland had proven the Vikings did indeed reach North America. The Vinland map seemed to be the perfect, elegant proof, moving the Viking achievement from the realm of archaeology into the heart of documented geographical knowledge. It suggested that the Norse discovery wasn't a forgotten secret, but information that had circulated among scholars and could theoretically have even been known to Columbus himself. The initial evidence for its authenticity was compelling. The parchment itself was radiocarbon dated to around 1435, perfectly aligning with the proposed date of the map. The ink, under early microscopic examination, showed cracking consistent with having dried and aged over centuries. The Latin inscriptions on the map displayed a knowledge of medieval abbreviations and phrasing that seemed beyond the capability of a modern forger. For a moment, it looked as if history had been rewritten, and the map was celebrated as one of the most significant historical discoveries of the 20th century. However, the seeds of doubt were sown almost immediately. The first major red flag was the map's curiously accurate portrayal of Greenland as an island. While we know today that Greenland is indeed an island, this was not common knowledge until the 20th century. Every other known medieval map depicts it as a peninsula attached to Europe or Asia. How could a 15th century cartographer have possessed this precise geographical knowledge? Skeptics argued this was a telltale sign of a modern forger injecting anachronistic information, a mistake born of 20th century hindsight. The real death knell for the map's authenticity, however, came from advanced chemical analysis. In the 1970s, and again with even more sophisticated techniques in the 2000s, scientists subjected the map's ink to rigorous testing using tools like Raman spectroscopy and electron microscopy. The results were unequivocal. The black line work of the map was not drawn with a medieval iron gall ink, which would have been made from iron salts and tannins from oak galls. Instead, it was made with a carbon-based ink, but that wasn't the main issue. The critical discovery was the presence of a crystalline compound called anatase titanium dioxide within the ink lines. Anatase is a very specific synthetic form of titanium dioxide. It was first produced in its pure, pigment-grade form in the 1920s and wasn't commercially available until after 1925. While trace amounts of anatase can occur naturally in other minerals, the particles found in the Vinland map's ink were perfectly uniform and pure, a signature of the modern industrial process. There was no plausible way a medieval ink maker could have isolated this compound and added it to their ink. The evidence was clear. The ink on the parchment was modern, meaning the map was drawn on an old piece of parchment sometime in the 20th century. Despite this seemingly conclusive scientific evidence, a small but passionate group of defenders continues to argue for the map's authenticity. They propose alternative theories for the anatase, suggesting it could have come from a rare medieval source or was a contaminant introduced during preservation efforts. They point to the complexity of the map's Latin text and the skillful aging of the parchment as being too sophisticated for a forger. Some even suggest the modern ink analysis itself could be flawed or that the sample tested was not representative. Yet, these arguments stand against the overwhelming consensus of chemists, conservators, and historians who see the anatase discovery as a smoking gun. The lingering question, then, is not if it was forged, but why and by whom. The most plausible theory centers on a rather sad and intriguing figure, a Jesuit priest and historian named Father Joseph Fisher, a renowned expert in medieval cartography who died in 1944. He had access to the necessary manuscripts and knowledge, and the map's appearance shortly after his death is highly suggestive. The motive may not have been financial gain, but a desire to create the very evidence he had spent his life searching for definitive proof of the Norse discoveries he so deeply believed in. It was perhaps the ultimate act of historical wish fulfillment, a scholarly hoax meant to cement a truth its creator felt was unjustly ignored. The Vinland map endures not as a genuine medieval artifact, but as a brilliant and tragic fake. It is a masterpiece of deception that preyed on our deepest desires to touch and see proof of the past. It reminds us that the line between history and forgery can be as thin as a line of ink on ancient parchment, and that the most dangerous historical lies are those we desperately want to believe. The debate over the Baghdad Batteries' function is so compelling precisely because it can be tested. Modern researchers haven't just speculated, they've built replicas to see if the ancient design actually works. Using terracotta jars of similar size and materials available to the Parthians, copper, iron, and a common acidic electrolyte like grape juice or vinegar, these reconstructions have yielded fascinating results. When filled with such a solution, the device does indeed produce a measurable electric current. A single cell can generate between half a volt and 2 volts of electricity. While that might seem minuscule, it's enough to create a faint tingling sensation on the tongue, a small shock that would have felt like magic or divine power to someone 2,000 years ago. More significantly, by connecting several of these cells together in a series, researchers have been able to create a battery pack capable of producing up to 4 or 5 volts, enough to power a small light bulb or, more relevantly, to perform a specific ancient craft, electroplating. This is where the theory gains its most practical footing. The process of electroplating uses an electric current to bind a thin layer of a precious metal, like gold or silver, onto the surface of a less valuable metal object. In the 1970s, a German Egyptologist named Arne Egebrecht conducted a famous experiment. Using a replica of the Baghdad Battery filled with grape juice as the electrolyte, he connected several cells together and successfully electroplated a silver statuette with a microscopically thin layer of gold. This demonstrated that the technology was not only possible but also effective for the kind of fine metalwork the Parthians and Sasanians were known for. Many museums hold ancient objects, particularly small jewelry and religious icons, that appear to be made of solid gold, but upon closer inspection are actually base metals coated with an astonishingly even and thin layer of gold. While these were traditionally thought to be made using a mercury-based fire gilding technique, proponents of the battery theory argue that the uniformity and quality of the plating on some pieces is more consistent with an electrochemical process. It suggests a workshop where a row of these clay jars linked together could have provided craftsmen with a reliable, if not fully understood, method for creating stunning gilded artworks. Yet, despite these convincing experiments, mainstream archaeology remains largely and understandably skeptical. The core of their argument rests on a profound absence of evidence. If these devices were indeed ancient batteries used for industrial-scale electroplating, we would expect to find a trail of archaeological clues. We would expect to find wires or conductors, strips of metal, or even something as simple as wet string that could have connected the cells. Not a single such wire has ever been found in association with any of the batteries. We would also expect to find the workshops themselves, setups with multiple batteries linked together. Instead, the dozen or so known examples have been found isolated, scattered across different sites. Most convincingly, skeptics point out that we have never found an electroplated object that can be definitively and chemically linked back to one of these batteries. Without that smoking gun, an artifact plated with a signature that matches the output of a specific Baghdad battery, the connection remains a compelling but unproven hypothesis. The alternative explanation that these were simply secure containers for sacred scrolls is far less glamorous but fits the archaeological context more neatly. The iron rod stuck through an asphalt plug inside a copper cylinder creates a perfectly sealed and protected core. An organic scroll made of parchment or papyrus could have been wound around the iron rod with the copper cylinder and asphalt stopper protecting it from moisture and pests. Over the centuries, the scroll would have completely decayed, leaving behind only the durable metal and mineral components. This would explain why no wires were found; they never existed. It would also explain the asphalt plug, which is an excellent waterproofer, and the fact that some of the jars were found with bitumen-coated stoppers, further supporting a storage function. This theory doesn't require any leaps of faith or lost technology. It describes a practical, clever solution for preserving important documents, which aligns perfectly with what we know of ancient administrative and religious practices. Ultimately, the Baghdad Battery exists in a beautiful, frustrating space between possibility and proof. It demonstrates that ancient people had all the components and the basic chemical knowledge to stumble upon electrochemistry. Whether they actually did and for what purpose is the real mystery. It forces us to confront our own assumptions about the linear progression of technology. Perhaps a forgotten artisan did discover this curious effect, used it for a specific, limited purpose that was never widely adopted, and the knowledge was simply lost. The battery isn't necessarily proof of a widespread ancient technology, but it could be evidence of a brilliant, isolated flash of insight, a spark of genius that flickered for a moment in the distant past before being swallowed again by the darkness of time, waiting millennia for us to rediscover it and wonder. This brings us to the central and truly mind-bending question at the heart of the Shroud of Turin. If it's not a painting, then how on earth was the image formed? How did the likeness of a crucified man, in perfect anatomical detail, become imprinted onto this piece of linen with a level of precision that modern science cannot replicate? The proposed answers form a spectrum that stretches from the cunningly human to the divinely miraculous, and none of them offer a complete, uncontested solution. On one end of that spectrum, we have the suggestion of early photographic techniques. Could a medieval genius have created what amounts to a primitive photograph centuries before the invention of the camera? Proponents of this theory imagine a camera obscura, a dark room or box with a small hole that projects an outside image onto a wall, being used to project the image of a model or even a corpse onto the cloth, which had been treated with a light-sensitive silver compound. The image would then be fixed, creating a permanent negative. While a fascinating idea that would explain the image's photographic qualities, it faces immense practical hurdles. There is no historical record or evidence of anyone possessing the knowledge of chemistry and optics required for such a feat in the 1300s. The process would have required an understanding of principles that simply did not exist, and the necessary equipment and chemicals leave no trace behind, making it an intriguing but ultimately speculative dead end. A more naturalistic theory involves some form of chemical reaction between the cloth and the body it covered. The most common version of this idea is known as the Maillard reaction hypothesis. This proposes that gases like ammonia, released from a body undergoing decomposition, interacted with the carbohydrates and impurities on the surface of the linen fibers. This interaction, a form of non-enzymatic browning similar to what happens when you toast bread or sear a steak, could have caused a subtle caramelization of the cellulose, creating the yellowish image. This theory is appealing because it requires no human artist and is a known chemical process. However, critics point out that it's difficult to see how such a diffuse gas could create an image with such razor-sharp resolution and three-dimensional information encoded within it. A gas would envelop the cloth evenly, not create a perfect, lifelike imprint with varying intensity based on the distance between the cloth and the body. This leads us to the most scientifically daring and controversial explanation. a short, intense burst of radiation. Several scientists, including the late physicist John Jackson of the Turin Shroud Center of Colorado, have proposed that the image was formed by some kind of energy event that emanated from the body itself. This energy, whether a form of ultraviolet light, a corona discharge, or proton radiation, would have caused a very superficial dehydration and oxidation of the topmost fibrils of the linen, literally scorching the image onto the cloth from within. This theory elegantly explains the image's most puzzling features: its three-dimensionality, as the intensity of the energy would naturally vary with the distance between the body and the cloth, its lack of any pigment, and its confinement to the very surface of the threads. The problem, of course, is the source of this energy. From a purely scientific standpoint, we know of no natural phenomenon that could produce such a directed, bodily emission of energy at the moment of death. For those who believe the shroud is authentic, this energy burst is seen as the physical manifestation of the resurrection event itself, a divine flash of light that left behind this eternal photograph. For skeptics, it's an ad hoc explanation that ventures into the realm of the supernatural to solve a problem that likely has a more mundane, if still unknown, answer. And so, we are left at an impasse. Science has been remarkably effective at telling us what the image on the shroud is not. It is not a painting. It is not a scorch from applied heat. It was not created with any known artistic medium, but it has been utterly unable to provide a definitive, reproducible answer for what it is. Every proposed method, from the artistic to the chemical to the radiological, fails to account for all of the image's unique characteristics under rigorous testing. The Shroud of Turin, therefore, stands as one of history's most perfect and enduring enigmas. It is a puzzle that challenges the boundaries between science and faith, between history and belief. It asks us to consider the possibility that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be pondered. A silent, linen testament to an event so profound that its echo, captured in a faint, straw-colored stain, continues to defy explanation centuries later. To truly understand the purpose of these sprawling desert drawings, we must step into the worldview of the people who created them. For the Nazca, living in one of the most arid places on the planet, the most precious and powerful force in the universe was not found in the sky, but in the earth itself, water. Their entire existence hinged on the unpredictable arrival of water from the distant Andes Mountains, carried down through underground aquifers and rare river valleys. This desperate dependence on a scarce resource likely infused every aspect of their culture, and many scholars believe the geoglyphs were a monumental, desperate prayer to the deities who controlled it. The lines were not meant to be seen by gods in the sky, but to be walked upon by people on the ground, a form of ritual pilgrimage designed to commune with and appease the sources of life. Look closely at the specific animals they chose to depict. The spider is a profound symbol across many Andean cultures, intimately connected with rain and fertility. Ancient beliefs held that spiders could predict rainfall, and their webs capture the morning dew, a vital source of moisture in the desert. The hummingbird, with its incredible ability to fly great distances and its dependence on nectar, is a messenger, a creature that bridges the world of humans and the mountain gods who are believed to release the life-giving water from their peaks. The monkey, found in lush Amazonian forests far to the east, could represent a plea for the abundance and water wealth of those distant lands. Even the seemingly abstract geometric shapes take on new meaning in this context. The long, straight lines often point directly to sources of water or to the horizon points where the life-giving rains would appear during the summer solstice. The wide trapezoids could have served as ceremonial plazas where communities gathered to leave offerings, colorful pottery, shells, and food to these powerful deities. This transforms the desert from a barren canvas into a sacred, ritual landscape. Imagine groups of people, perhaps led by priests or clan leaders, walking these pathways during specific times of the year. They might have traced the outline of the hummingbird, symbolically following the messenger to the mountain gods. They could have processed down a long, straight avenue that pointed toward a distant peak, chanting and carrying vessels of water as offerings. These rituals would have been a direct physical interaction with the divine, a way to actively participate in the cycle of life and death that governed their world. The act of walking the lines, of wearing a path into the desert floor, was itself a form of permanent prayer, etching their devotion and their desperate need directly into the land they depended on. The lines also functioned as a sophisticated map of this sacred geography, connecting communities to vital resources and to each other. Many of the longest lines run straight across the rugged terrain, ignoring natural obstacles, connecting ancient ceremonial centers with distant water sources or sacred mountains on the horizon. These were not just spiritual pathways, but likely also physical ones, used by pilgrims traveling to important sites for festivals and rituals. In a culture without a written language, the desert itself became a text, a three-dimensional map of their cosmology, their resources, and their social connections. The placement of a geoglyph near a water source wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration of that place's sacred importance, a way of marking and honoring the very heart of their survival. Ultimately, the Nazca Lines stand as a breathtaking testament to human ingenuity in the face of existential challenge. They represent a profound understanding of the environment, not in a modern scientific sense, but in a deeply spiritual and symbolic one. They are the opposite of a technology of control. They are a technology of supplication, a massive, community-wide effort to communicate with the forces of nature through movement, art, and ritual. They show us a people who did not see themselves as separate from their harsh environment, but as an integral part of it, seeking harmony through a dialogue written in stone and walked into the earth. This makes their message all the more powerful today, a timeless reminder of our own enduring dependence on the natural world and the lengths to which humanity will go to ensure its survival. Yet, even as these methods have failed to provide a definitive translation, a new era of codebreakers has entered the fray, armed not with pen and paper, but with artificial intelligence and powerful machine learning algorithms. In 2017, a Canadian team made headlines around the world when they applied artificial intelligence to the manuscript's text. Their algorithm, designed to recognize patterns and decipher the underlying structure of languages, was first trained on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document available in over 300 different languages. After this training, the AI was unleashed on the Voynich's mysterious script. The stunning conclusion it reached was that the text was most likely encoded Hebrew. The researchers proposed that the author used a method called alphagramming, where each word's letters are reordered into a specific, consistent pattern, essentially creating an anagram-based cipher. According to their model, the first sentence of the manuscript supposedly translated to, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people." It was a bold claim that seemed to finally pierce the veil of this 700-year-old mystery. However, the initial wave of excitement was quickly met with intense scrutiny and ultimately rejection from the academic community. Linguists and cryptographers pointed out critical flaws in the AI's approach. The main issue was that the AI was not actually translating the text. It was making a statistical guess about the language family based on patterns. Hebrew was its best guess, but that guess was built on a foundation of assumptions that could not be verified. Furthermore, when other scholars attempted to apply the proposed Hebrew alphagram method to other parts of the manuscript, the results were inconsistent and often produced gibberish. The translations lacked the coherent, flowing meaning one would expect from a genuine text on herbalism or astronomy. The AI had found a pattern that fit a small sample, but it could not be reliably scaled to unlock the entire document. This highlights a fundamental challenge with using artificial intelligence on such a unique problem. An AI is only as good as the data it's trained on and the parameters set by its human programmers. Without a known key or a verified example of the cipher, any result it produces is essentially a sophisticated, high-tech guess. This pattern has repeated itself for over a century. A new theory emerges promising a final solution. It gains popular attention, fueled by our deep desire for closure. Then, expert linguists and historians dissect the claim, finding fatal flaws in its methodology or inconsistencies in its proposed translations. The theory joins a long graveyard of failed attempts, from the belief that it's a forgotten Celtic language to the idea that it's a constructed philosophical language. The Voynich Manuscript's defenses are so robust because it possesses what cryptographers call entropy levels that perfectly match natural human languages. Its word lengths, character repetition, and sentence structure all behave statistically like real speech, not random nonsense. This means that any proposed solution must not only produce a translation, but that translation must make contextual sense with the illustrations beside it. A decoding that claims a page about plants is actually a recipe for soup, or a section on star charts is a personal diary entry, immediately rings false. The text and the images are intrinsically linked, and a true decipherment must explain that relationship perfectly across all of the manuscript's diverse sections. What makes the Voynich manuscript so eternally captivating is not the promise of a solution, but the very fact that it remains unsolvable. In a world where we can sequence ancient DNA and peer back to the edge of the universe with powerful telescopes, this unassuming book of vellum and ink defiantly guards its secrets. It is a monument to the limits of our knowledge, a reminder that the past does not always surrender its mysteries willingly. It represents the ultimate locked room mystery, a puzzle crafted by a mind we cannot comprehend for a purpose we can only imagine. The Voynich manuscript endures not as a historical document waiting to be read, but as a philosophical concept, a permanent question mark that challenges our arrogance and fuels our boundless curiosity. It is the siren song of the unknown, calling out to each new generation of thinkers, daring them to try and fail, and in doing so, to appreciate the profound and beautiful mystery at the heart of human communication itself. Recent advancements in imaging technology have truly unlocked the mechanism's deepest secrets, propelling our understanding from admiration into the realm of absolute astonishment. Researchers from University College London and the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project have employed incredibly precise three-dimensional X-ray scanning and complex mathematical modeling to peer into the calcified layers that have hidden the device's full complexity for 2 millennia. What they found was a labyrinth of interlocking gears of such sophistication that it rivals the intricate clockwork of 18th-century Swiss watches. The mechanism wasn't just a simple calculator, it was a miniature mechanical universe housed in a wooden box. One of the most groundbreaking discoveries was the confirmation of a complex system of epicyclic gears, also known as planetary gears, because their motion mimics the way planets appear to move in retrograde across the night sky. This wasn't just a rough approximation. The gearing perfectly and elegantly replicated the ancient Greek understanding of the planet's irregular, wandering paths. The mechanism could now be shown to accurately track the positions of all 5 planets known to the ancients: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, with a level of precision that is simply staggering for its time. This newfound complexity has inevitably reignited a tantalizing and enduring question: who could have possibly designed such a marvel? The ghost of one of antiquity's greatest minds, Archimedes of Syracuse, looms large over the mechanism. We know from the writings of Cicero that Archimedes had built a planetarium, a mechanical model of the heavens. That was brought to Rome as a war prize after his death during the siege of Syracuse in 212 BC. Cicero describes 2 such devices, one kept by the general Marcellus and another that demonstrated the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. The timing and the described sophistication are a remarkable match. While the Antikythera mechanism itself was constructed later, after Archimedes' death, the leading theory posits that it was built based on his mathematical principles and designs, perhaps by a workshop of brilliant craftsmen in Corinth or Rhodes who are continuing his legacy. It represents the culmination of his genius, a physical manifestation of his work that may have been decades or even a century ahead of its time. The implications of these findings are truly revolutionary, forcing a complete rewrite of the history of technology. For centuries, we believed such complex geared devices only emerged in Europe during the 14th century. The Antikythera mechanism shatters that timeline, proving that the ancient Greeks were not just theoretical philosophers but unparalleled engineers capable of creating technology that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years. It stands as a powerful and humbling testament to a lost pinnacle of scientific achievement, a single, salvaged glimpse into a world of knowledge we can only dream was once commonplace. This one artifact single-handedly elevates our entire perception of ancient technological capability, suggesting that the sparks of the scientific revolution were struck not in the Renaissance, but in the classical world, only to be tragically lost in the deep waters off a tiny Greek island. The journey of the crystal skulls from museum curiosities to pop culture icons is a masterclass in how a good story can eclipse dry archaeological fact. While academics were quietly dismissing the skulls as 19th century fakes, a different kind of magic was happening in the world of pulp adventure and Hollywood fantasy. The key figure in this transformation was none other than F.A. Mitchell Hedges himself, a man who understood the power of a dramatic tale. He wasn't just an adventurer, he was a storyteller, and he wove the narrative of his daughter's discovery in a lost jungle city into a compelling legend through his 1954 book, Danger My Ally. This book presented him as a swashbuckling hero, and the skull as his most mysterious and prized trophy, instantly grafting an aura of high adventure onto the object that it would never shake off. This foundation of mystery provided the perfect kindling for the burgeoning New Age movement of the 1960s and 70s, as people began exploring alternative spirituality, psychedelics, and concepts of ancient wisdom. The skulls found a new and deeply enthusiastic audience. They were no longer just questionable artifacts, they were transformed into vessels of esoteric power. Proponents claimed they could be used for scrying, for healing, for expanding consciousness, and for communicating with lost civilizations or even extraterrestrials. The very thing that made them fraudulent from a historical perspective, their perfect, machine-like craftsmanship, became proof of their otherworldly origin in these new circles. Their alleged antiquity was used to suggest they held secrets from a purer, more spiritually advanced time. This spiritual rebranding was incredibly potent, creating a belief system that was completely immune to scientific debunking. After all, if you believe an object channels divine energy, its date of manufacture becomes irrelevant. Its power exists in the present moment, in the belief of the beholder. Then came the nuclear moment of cultural penetration, Hollywood. The 1980s saw the release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which took this niche legend and blasted it into the global mainstream. The film's plot, involving a psychic skull of extraterrestrial origin and its connection to a lost city of gold, was a perfect synthesis of all the myths that had grown around the artifact. It presented the story not as a question but as a thrilling fact. For millions of viewers, this wasn't just entertainment. It was an introduction to what they assumed was a real archaeological mystery. The film's massive success cemented the crystal skull's place in the modern mythological lexicon, making them more famous than ever and ensuring that the scientific truth would forever be playing a desperate game of catch-up against a much more exciting narrative. This created a fascinating cultural split, a phenomenon where two entirely different truths now coexist. In the world of archaeology and museology, the case is definitively closed. The skulls are interesting examples of 19th century lapidary art and the antiquities market, but they are fakes. Yet, in the realm of popular culture and metaphysical belief, they are utterly real, powerful relics that inspire wonder, spiritual exploration, and a sense of connection to a mysterious past. This duality is the skull's true legacy. They teach us that an object's most significant power often isn't inherent in its origin, but is bestowed upon it by the stories we choose to tell about it. They are a mirror reflecting our own desires for adventure, for mystery, for proof that the world is more magical than it seems. The crystal skulls are ultimately a perfect modern myth, born not in deep antiquity but in a gem cutter's workshop, and achieving immortality not through their age, but through the undeniable power of a story too good to let facts get in the way. The isolation of the Phaistos disk is the single greatest obstacle standing between us and its meaning. Unlike the rich corpora of texts found for linear A and B, or the extensive records of Egyptian hieroglyphs, the disk is a solitary messenger. It speaks a language we have never heard before, using an alphabet we have never seen elsewhere. This profound loneliness in the archaeological record transforms it from a mere puzzle into a profound enigma. Without other examples of its script, linguists are essentially trying to solve a crossword puzzle with no clues and only one across answer. Decipherment relies on pattern recognition, on finding repeated phrases across multiple texts, on comparing known words to unknown ones. The disk offers none of that. It is a closed system, a unique snapshot of a thought frozen in time with no key to unlock it. This is why the discovery of a Rosetta Stone equivalent is the dream of every researcher who studies it. The real Rosetta Stone worked because it presented the same message in three scripts: hieroglyphic Egyptian, Demotic, and ancient Greek. Scholars could use the known language, Greek, to crack the code of the unknown one. For the Phaistos disk, we lack that parallel text. There is no bilingual inscription, no handy translation guide buried alongside it. Some have desperately looked for comparisons in the limited corpus of Linear A, the still undeciphered script of the Minoans. While a handful of the disk's 45 signs bear a vague resemblance to Linear symbols, the similarities are superficial and not nearly enough to establish a definitive link. The fundamental structures appear completely different. Linear is primarily a syllabic script used for administrative lists and inventories on clay tablets, while the disk's spiraling, stamped symbols suggest a different purpose entirely, perhaps something more narrative or ceremonial. This isolation has forced linguists to look further afield, leading to some of the most fascinating and speculative theories in recent years. One compelling avenue of research has attempted to connect the disk's language to the ancient Anatolian family, specifically a language like Luwian, which was spoken in what is now Turkey. Proponents of this theory point to the discovery of a hieroglyphic Luwian seal in the Minoan palace of Knossos as evidence of cultural contact. They argue that the disk could represent a form of Luwian or a related language written in a unique local script. Some have even suggested it could be a form of Hittite or a precursor to Etruscan. These proposals are tantalizing because they at least offer a potential linguistic framework, a known grammar and vocabulary to test against the disk's sequences. However, these attempts have also failed to produce a universally accepted translation. The matches remain speculative, and the absence of any other Luwian artifacts written in this specific script on Crete makes it a difficult hypothesis to prove. The very method of the disk's creation adds another layer of mystery to its isolation. The use of individual punches to stamp each symbol into the clay is effectively an early form of movable type printing. This technology was revolutionary, and its appearance in the 2nd millennium BC is nothing short of astonishing. But it raises a perplexing question. If this technology existed, why was it used for this one single object and then abandoned for over 3,000 years until Gutenberg? It seems incredibly inefficient to craft a unique set of 45 precise metal or wooden stamps for a single document. This suggests the disk was not an oddity, but perhaps a representative of a wider tradition that has been completely lost to time. Maybe other documents were stamped onto perishable materials like parchment, papyrus, or leather, which simply did not survive the damp Cretan climate. The disc, baked hard and preserved by chance, might be the sole surviving example of a much larger body of work, a lone survivor of a forgotten library, making its message all the more tragic and urgent. We are left staring at this beautifully crafted relic, a testament to someone's profound need to communicate a message with permanence and precision, forever wondering what urgent news, sacred hymn, or great story they were so desperate to preserve. For generations, the tantalizing clues of the copper scroll have acted as a siren's call, luring everyone from scholarly archaeologists to zealous treasure hunters into the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Judean desert. This isn't a search for a single chest of gold. It's a pursuit of 64 separate caches, a hoard so vast it borders on the mythological. The scroll's instructions read with a maddening blend of precision and obscurity, a recipe for frustration. It tells you to look for a place like the ruin that is in the valley, to dig 4 cubits near a water conduit, or to find a tomb marked by 2 pillars. These were unmistakable landmarks 2,000 years ago, but today they are ghosts. Every valley has countless ruins, every ancient water system has crumbled, and the pillars have long since been toppled and buried by centuries of wind and sand. This is the central, frustrating paradox of the scroll. It is incredibly specific in its details, yet those details are anchored to a world that has utterly vanished. This hasn't stopped the dreamers. Expeditions have scoured the hills around Qumran, around Jericho, and throughout the Dead Sea region, armed with shovels, hope, and increasingly sophisticated technology. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, and drone surveys have all been deployed in the attempt to see what the naked eye cannot, to find the hidden cavities or metallic deposits that might match the scroll's descriptions. One of the most famous modern quests was led by a Florida-based group with the fitting name Copper Scroll Project. They invested significant resources following a complex decipherment by scholar Vendell Jones that pointed to a specific cave system. Their work, like all the others, was met with intense media interest and ultimately the same empty-handed result. The technological tools can find anomalies, but they cannot confirm that a blip on a screen is the 22 talents of silver mentioned in Instruction 12. For that, you still need to dig, and every dig is a gamble of time, money, and physical labor against impossible odds. The repeated, total failure to find even a single talent of this legendary treasure has led many to a compelling and practical conclusion. The Romans probably got there first. Historical records describe the systematic looting of Jerusalem and the Second Temple by Roman legions following the siege in 70 AD. It is entirely plausible that the Essenes, or another Jewish sect, were entrusted with this list for safekeeping, only for the Romans to uncover the hiding places through interrogation, forced labor, or sheer methodical force. The treasure of the temple, one of the greatest concentrations of wealth in the ancient world, was a primary target for the victorious army, and its fate was likely dispersal across the Roman Empire, melted down into coins or minted into triumphal monuments. In this view, the Copper Scroll is not a map to a waiting fortune, but a heartbreaking inventory of loss, a list of what was taken, not what remains. Yet the allure persists undimmed by logic or history. The human psyche is wired for discovery, and the idea that billions in gold could be waiting just beneath the next rock is a powerful intoxicant. The scroll's very existence, a tangible, metallic instruction manual, keeps the dream alive. It feeds the same part of us that buys lottery tickets the belief that we might be the one exception, the one person who sees the clue everyone else has missed. The treasure of the Copper Scroll, therefore, exists in 2 forms. For the realist, it is a historical ghost, a testament to a tragic chapter of plunder and exile. For the optimist, it is still out there, hidden in a cave not yet touched by a shovel, waiting for the right pair of eyes to finally read the ancient directions correctly. This enduring mystery ensures that the scroll is more than a relic. It is an eternal invitation to adventure, a promise that the greatest find in history might still be one step away. Yet beyond these practical and military theories lies perhaps the most enchanting interpretation of all, that these objects held a profound religious or ritual significance for the people of Roman Gaul. Imagine a spiritual leader or a community elder using the dodecahedron not as a tool for the physical world, but as a key to understanding the divine. The number 12 is deeply symbolic across many ancient cultures, most notably representing the 12 signs of the zodiac that chart the sun's path through the heavens. It is not difficult to envision a dodecahedron with its 12 identical faces, serving as a tangible representation of this cosmic order. Each face could correspond to a zodiac sign, and the varying hole sizes might relate to the perceived brightness of important stars or the strength of celestial influences during different astrological periods. In the hands of a priest, this object could have been a portable instrument for ritual, used to determine the most auspicious dates for planting, harvesting, or conducting important ceremonies, connecting the rhythmic cycles of agriculture directly to the movements of the gods above. The potential for astronomical and calendrical use is particularly compelling when we consider the life of a Gallo-Roman farmer. His entire livelihood depended on correctly reading the seasons. A mistake in the sowing date could mean the difference between abundance and famine. While the Roman Empire had official calendars, these were often based on the solar year and required corrections that were not always communicated effectively to the distant provinces. A local mechanical device that could help determine the optimal time for planting by, for instance, measuring the angle of the sun's rays at a particular time of day, would have been incredibly valuable. One ingenious theory suggests that by holding a dodecahedron up to the sky, a user could align the sun's light through a specific hole to illuminate a mark on the opposite side, signaling a precise date in the agricultural year. This would transform the object from a simple tool into a sacred intermediary, a way of literally capturing a divine signal to ensure the community's survival. The different hole sizes would then correspond to the sun's changing position throughout the year, creating a reliable year-after-year guide rooted in celestial observation. Furthermore, these objects are frequently discovered in contexts that hint at personal devotion rather than public function. Many have been found carefully placed in burial sites alongside coins and other personal effects, suggesting they were cherished belongings intended to accompany their owner into the afterlife. Others have been uncovered in stored hoards of valuables, buried for safekeeping during times of unrest. This pattern of deposition indicates they were items of significant personal value, perhaps talismans or symbols of status within a specific religious group or mystery cult. The knobs on each corner make them perfectly sized for hands to hold during meditation or prayer, their geometric symmetry perhaps representing a philosophical ideal of harmony and order. In a world where the line between the spiritual and the everyday was seamlessly blended, the Roman dodecahedron could have been all these things at once: a ritual object, a calendrical guide, a symbol of cosmic beauty, and a cherished token of faith, its true meaning known only to those initiated into its mysteries. This mysterious origin story and the stark, uncompromising nature of its message made the Georgia Guidestones a lightning rod for conspiracy theories almost from the moment they were erected. The very anonymity of its sponsors was seen not as a quirk, but as the first and greatest clue proof that a shadowy cabal was operating behind the scenes, using the monument as a brazen public declaration of their intentions. For those predisposed to suspicion, the stones were not a warning or a guide, but a blueprint, a literal set of commandments for a future globalist utopia built on a foundation of human suffering and control. The theories that swirled around them were a vast and interconnected web of fear, each thread pulling on a different modern anxiety. The most pervasive and enduring theory painted the Guidestones as a project of the New World Order, a term used to describe a hypothesized totalitarian one-world government. The call for a universal language and a world court was seen as a direct plan to erase national sovereignty and individual cultures, creating a homogenized, easily managed global population. But it was the first directive, maintain humanity under 500,000,000, that truly fueled the fire. To conspiracy theorists, this was not a hopeful goal for a future balance with nature. It was a chilling admission of a planned genocide. They interpreted this as the elite's target number, a revelation that they intended to eliminate over 90% of the world's current population through war, famine, engineered pandemics, or other nefarious means to achieve their desired perpetual balance. The stones, in this view, were a triumphalist monument to this horrific plan, erected in plain sight as a taunt to those who would eventually uncover the truth. Other theories delved into the occult, seeing the monument not as political but as satanic or pagan. The choice of 8 modern and 4 ancient languages was dissected for hidden numerological significance. Its precise astronomical alignments were interpreted not as a clever design feature, but as proof it was an altar for dark rituals, aligned to harness specific celestial energies. Some pointed to the message's frequent use of the number 5 and its multiples, finding sinister meaning in its repetition. This angle connected the Guidestones to wider fears of secret societies like the Illuminati or the Rosicrucians, with many believing that C. Christian was a direct nod to Christian Rosencreutz, the legendary founder of Rosicrucianism. The stones were thus a message to other initiates, a declaration of their ongoing influence and a site of power within their symbolic geography. The monument's violent destruction in 2022 didn't end the speculation. It supercharged it, transforming the stones from a physical object into an immortal legend. For those who believed the Guidestones were evil, the bombing was a heroic act of defiance, a successful blow struck against the architects of the New World Order. They celebrated the unknown perpetrators as patriots who had destroyed a monument to tyranny. For those who saw the stones as a noble warning, the attack was an act of violent ignorance, the fulfillment of the very intolerance the message cautioned against. And for the true conspiracy-minded, the destruction was itself a false flag operation orchestrated by the very elites who had commissioned the stones to garner sympathy, to martyr the monument, and to further obscure their true plans now that their hand had been revealed. The rubble itself became a relic, each fragment a piece of the puzzle, ensuring that the Georgia Guidestones, in their physical absence, would forever hold power as the ultimate Rorschach test of our fears, a perfect symbol of how a message once sent can never be controlled, only interpreted. Despite the compelling mainstream explanation, the allure of a lost world has proven far too powerful for the Peru Rise map to remain solely in the domain of academic cartography. Its most enduring legacy lies in how it was catapulted into the center of a modern mythos, becoming a foundational text for an entire genre of alternative history. The spark for this fire was struck in 1966 by a professor named Charles Hapgood in his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. Hapgood, captivated by the apparent accuracy of the Antarctic coastline, proposed a radical theory. The map was evidence of a vast, global seafaring civilization that existed during the last ice age, a sophisticated culture with advanced knowledge of spherical trigonometry and cartography that was subsequently lost to a great cataclysm. This civilization, he argued, must have mapped the world when Antarctica was largely free of ice, pushing the date of the original source maps back to at least 6,000 years ago, if not 12,000 or more. This theory was a perfect vessel for a much older and more romantic idea, the legend of Atlantis. Proponents of this view eagerly adopted the Peru Rise map as Exhibit A, arguing it was a tangible fragment of the geographical knowledge possessed by that fabled lost continent. The map's supposed depiction of an ice-free Antarctica became the linchpin in a narrative of a pre-Diluvian world of high technology and global exploration, a golden age wiped clean by a planetary disaster. The map's own note about relying on charts from the time of Alexander the Great was conveniently expanded to suggest those charts were themselves copies of copies, preserving Atlantean knowledge that had been passed down through the libraries of Alexandria and Constantinople before finally reaching the hands of a Turkish admiral. This captivating narrative, however, wilts under the harsh light of historical context that mainstream scholars have meticulously assembled. The most significant blow to the ancient civilization theory is the map's own glaring omissions and errors. It shows no sign of the Drake Passage, the crucial 600-mile wide strait that separates South America from the Antarctic Peninsula. If the map were truly based on ancient surveys of an ice-free continent, this major seaway would be unmistakable. Its absence strongly suggests that the cartographer simply extended the contour of South America southward, merging it with the theoretical southern continent that had been a fixture of European geographical speculation since the Greeks. Furthermore, the map is riddled with inaccuracies in the Caribbean and the Atlantic, with islands wildly misplaced and scales distorted, which is inconsistent with the work of a hyper-advanced global civilization but entirely consistent with the patchwork, second-hand knowledge of a 16th-century compiler. The true sources of the map's seemingly advanced information are now well understood and far more mundane, though no less fascinating from a historical perspective. Piri Reis himself explicitly states he used maps from Christopher Columbus, and the depiction of the Caribbean and Central America aligns perfectly with the known errors and discoveries of Columbus's voyages. More importantly, scholars have identified the clear influence of Portuguese explorations of the Brazilian coast. In the years immediately before 1519, Portuguese navigators had meticulously charted the eastern bulge of South America. Their maps, which were state secrets fiercely guarded by Lisbon, would have been priceless intelligence for an Ottoman admiral. It is highly likely that Turkish agents obtained or copied these Portuguese charts, and that the detailed, accurate rendering of Brazil on the Piri Reis map is directly traced from these stolen sources. The enigmatic southern landmass, then, is not Antarctica at all, but a composite, a blending of the newly discovered Brazilian coast with the age-old myth of Terra Australis, a speculative guess that happened to land roughly in the vicinity of a continent no European would officially see for another 300 years. The enduring power of the Piri Reis map, therefore, lies in this fascinating duality. For academics, it is a brilliant historical document that illustrates the dynamic transfer of knowledge and the collision of myth and emerging reality at the dawn of the age of exploration. It shows a world in transition where ancient legends still held sway but were being forcefully reshaped by empirical discovery. For the public imagination, however, it serves as a vast and empty canvas. Its blank spaces and ambiguous lines invite projection, allowing us to fill the voids with our own deepest desires for a more mysterious past. The map doesn't need to be a literal artifact from Atlantis to hold meaning. Its true value is as a mirror, reflecting our timeless fascination with the idea that great secrets lie just beyond the edge of the known world, waiting for the right map to lead us back to them. And so our journey ends not with a single answer, but with a breathtaking tapestry of human curiosity itself. We've ventured from the bottom of the sea to the depths of the desert, held objects of divine mystery and devilish deception, and marveled at the sheer breadth of questions the past has left for us. These 35 artifacts represent the full spectrum of our relationship with history, from the Antikythera Mechanism, a genuine window into an ancient genius we never knew existed, to the Ica stones, a confessed hoax that continues to capture imaginations with its wild narrative. Some, like the Voynich Manuscript, are true enigmas that stubbornly resist all our advanced tools, humbling our modern arrogance. Others, like the crystal skulls, are beautiful fakes that teach us how a compelling story can become more powerful than factual truth. What unites them all, whether real or forged, is what they reveal about us. They are mirrors reflecting our deepest desires, to know our origins, to find proof of the miraculous, to believe that history holds grander secrets than our textbooks allow. A genuine artifact like the Saqqara bird challenges our timeline of innovation, forcing us to wonder about lost knowledge. A clever forgery like the Vinland map shows our powerful yearning to connect with legendary explorers, even if we have to create the evidence ourselves. Each object, in its own way, tells a dual story, one about its own origin, and another about the era that discovered or created it, revealing the hopes, fears, and fascinations of every generation that has grappled with its mystery. This collection is a testament to the fact that the past is not a static set of facts, but a living, breathing conversation. It's a dialogue between what we can prove, what we can imagine, and what we desperately want to believe. The greatest treasure these artifacts offer is not gold or definitive answers, but the endless spark of wonder they provide. They remind us that the drive to explore, to question, and to seek understanding is the most human quality of all. Now we turn the conversation over to you. Which of these astonishing artifacts captured your imagination most completely? Was it the heartbreaking potential of the Copper Scrolls treasure, the mechanical marvel of the ancient Greek computer, or the eerie image on the shroud? Share your thoughts and let us know which story you'll be pondering long after this video ends. If these astonishing stories of legendary artifacts have you hooked, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Our journey through history's greatest enigmas is just beginning. Make sure you're part of the adventure by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications with the bell icon. That way, you'll be the first to know when we drop new deep dives into the past's most captivating puzzles. For those of you eager to explore even further, we've packed the description with links to our sources, recommended books, and documentaries so you can continue your own investigation. And because this conversation is so much richer with your voices in it, we'd love to hear from you. What other legendary artifacts should we cover? Is there a historical mystery that keeps you up at night, wondering what secrets it might hold? Share your ideas in the comments below. Your suggestion might just become the focus of our next video. Together, let's keep unraveling the incredible, untold stories waiting just beneath the